Tony, thanks for agreeing to do the podcast.
My pleasure.
Just to tell the audience that, first of all, you're not actually a yeoman warder. We are doing this podcast in Andy Mary's living room because we're already down here.
Very nice it is too.
Yeah. A very, very cool house. Mate, just to give the audience a sort of who you are and how we know each other, I bought your book in an airport in 2016, Lethal Force, and obviously ended up meeting you through Andy Mary, the person we live in, the person we are with now today. Obviously loved your book and kind of met you a few times over the years. Probably, 30-year career, I think, in Metropolitan Police.
Yeah, 33 years.
33 years, yeah. Apologies.
Should have been 30.
Probably the most respected or renowned, experienced firearms officer, kind of like everyone. I've told everyone.
Yeah. Some would say notorious.
Notorious might be.
Well, I've literally told, I've told so many people you were coming on a podcast, and it does feel like everyone knows you. I'm not just saying that to be nice, but kind of great to have you on, mate. And
your reputation precedes you. I mean, that's it.
In a positive way.
Sure. I'm glad you added that. Yeah.
And your son's also a bootneckers, which is a good connection, I suppose. Mate, we normally sort of start these where, where you kind of come from, kind of how you sort of eventually went into your sort of chosen career.
Policing career.
And if you want to sort of start from the beginning, mate, day one.
So I had actually I know more about my life now. I'm 68 now, but in my late 40s, I discovered a little bit about my history, which I'll tell you about. But basically, I was born in the Far East. You're thinking, Hong Kong or something. No, it was Lowestoft. That's the furthest easterly point in the UK. And I was born on a Pontins holiday camp. When I was still just a few months old, my mum and my dad moved down to Sussex to help set up a new holiday camp that was owned by a guy called Leslie Dean. And Leslie Dean was my mum's boss. My dad's side of the family were fishmongers. Obviously, Lowestoft is a big fishing port, or was. And so he was sort of inside the wholesale fish market type thing. So he'd work down on the fish market every day and take in the fish. But he, we all moved down to Sussex, and my dad became the bar manager for this holiday camp. It's only a small holiday camp. I think it took a total of about 500 guests, which compared with like a Pontins or a Butlins was like a really small family concerned business. And Leslie Dean he was an architect as well, qualified architect, and he built 3 bungalows in a row, a big one for him and his wife, one for my mum and dad, and one for another couple that had come down to help set up the holiday camp and run it. But like I said, when I was in my late 40s, my girlfriend at the time was looking at a load of photo albums I had, and there was a photo album of my christening. And my girlfriend sees a picture of my godmother, who was Leslie Dean's daughter, holding me. And most of the photographs were black and white, but there was a couple of colour ones. And my godmother had red hair, and at the time she would have been in her sort of 20s. And my girlfriend goes, "Oh, is that your mum?" And I went, No, that's my godmother. And she goes, "Really? What, you got a blood relative as a godparent? That's kind of unusual." And I went, No, she's the daughter of my parents' boss, Leslie Dean. And my girlfriend goes, "You better have another look at that photograph." So I had a look at it, and I'm going, "What am I looking at?" And she goes, "That's your daughter." And it was almost like the shutters had gone up, and I looked at this picture of my godmother, and it was my daughter was in her 20s at the time, and I was like, "Oh my God, how did I never notice that?" And so eventually I confronted my godmother. My Leslie Dean had died by this point. My mother had died. And I spoke to my godmother, and she went, "Yeah, I've always known you, my brother. Yeah, what you got to realise is our dad was a shagger, blah blah blah. My mother's life was a misery, and it all just came out." And
that's crazy.
And so my 2 of my best friends growing up, transpires were actually my nephews, because they were Valerie's sons, and it was just accepted across the board that I was in fact my dad was Leslie Dean. But of course, by that time, like I said, Leslie Dean was born in like 1901 or something. But he'd actually got Fred Ponsonby into the holiday camp business. He had holiday camps before the Second World War, and he sold his first 2 camps to Leslie Dean after the thing, and was basically a silent partner for about 10 years. So, yeah, so I was brought up on a holiday camp, and it was a pucker. If you remember the TV show Heidi High,
right?
Heidi High, it was like that. So I had a pretty charmed lifestyle, and I couldn't work out why it was that I'd been sent to private school, because my mum and dad weren't particularly wealthy. Obviously, now I realise that Leslie Dean had paid for my education. So I was a posh kid, basically. I got sent to a private school until I reached the age of about 17. And I knew I was never academic. I was always good at sports and bunking off. And I'd been brought up on a diet of war mags, the old little war magazines, Commando magazine and all that. And I was always either going to join the military, or later I got into like cop movies, so real sort of 70s classics like The French Connection. And
Good film.
Yeah,
and it was the 70s, so having short hair wasn't fashionable. And to be honest, the British military uniform in the 70s was pretty chad as well. So I thought, no, I'm going to be an undercover cop, fucking flared jeans, 2-inch revolver, bubble perm, getting in car chases and shit. And
that was the influence.
Yeah, that was kind of the influence. So I applied. In the back of those magazines, there used to be like these little things that you cut out, little adverts where you just basically put your details in, and they'd send you all the recruitment stuff. And the police stuff came through first, basically. And within a matter of weeks, I'd got a letter from the thing saying you've got a date for an interview, and that was it. I was on the road to joining the police.
What year was that?
That would have been early 1975. Or late 74, early 75.
Straight into the Met.
Yeah, so I was brought up in Sussex. I really couldn't see myself being that kind of cop in Bognor Regis or Littlehampton.
Yeah.
I had an aunt that lived in London, and I used to love going up to London, as a young teenager, and just cutting around on the tube and going to places on my own. So I loved the idea of like the big city. Just seemed a lot more exciting, really.
What was the selection like then? I believe it was quite a bit different to what it is now.
So I actually turned up for a day at Paddington Green Police Station, which was where they did all the recruitment. It's a fairly modern police station. In fact, they're just in the process of demolishing it now, but I think it was only a few years old when I went there. And it was a tower block at the back, which was what we called a section house, which was where it was a single officers accommodation. I think it's single men accommodation, and then the police station itself. And it was also where they took terrorist prisoners, had extra security there. And it was for years and years, almost most of my service, it was where terrorists were always taken. But it was also the recruitment thing. So I went there, and literally the day consisted of a written test, because despite Leslie Dean having spent a fortune on my education, I came away with 3 O-levels and 2 of those were English. I had to do a basic home office academic test, bit of maths, bit of English, and which I did all right on. I discovered for the first time I was colourblind, so I thought that was going to present a problem. It turned out not to. And then the weirdest bit of the whole thing, and if you speak to any coppers of my vintage, and probably actually for about 20 years after I went through the process in 75, they had this bizarre ritual where you went into a room, they gave you a dressing gown, you went into a room, there were 3 men in white coats who I'm to this day I'm not convinced they were actually doctors, and they just sat there at a table. I described it in my book as it was like something out of Monty Python. But before we all went in, we said, you're going to see footprints painted on the floor. Stand on the footprints, and they're busy people, so, don't wait to be asked. Just take your dressing gown off, bend over and spread your arse cheeks. So I've got my back to these 3 guys at the table. I've got my arse cheeks spread, and I only looked about 12. There was nothing of me. I weighed about 9.5 stone soaking wet, I think. And they said, "Oh, we don't, Mr. Long. No, we're not interested in that right now. Can you just come over to the table?" So I'm sort of there with my arse cheeks. I'm looking over my shoulder. I'm going, "Sorry," and they went, "Just come over to the table." So I sort of shuffled over to the table with my hands around my bollocks, and they had a row of different coloured dinky toys on the, little corgi toys on the front of this desk. And they said, "Can you just tell us the colour of these cars, please?" So I was like, "Yeah, that's blue, that's yellow, that's green, that's a sort of salmony, pinky, browny sort of colour, that's greenish, but it might be brown. And they went, yeah, that'll do. That's fine. Thank you. You've passed that. And that was it. And they put your dressing gown on, and I left. And to this day, I still don't know what they were looking at my ring piece for. But I can guess, but I don't know for certain. But it's like if you talk to any coppers, you go, "What was that about?" No one.
I thought it wasn't just done for you. That one.
No. I mean, don't get me wrong. I was a pretty boy, but yeah. So that was that. So he did that, and then if you pass, you went for an interview, and I can't remember the exact layout. I just remember there were 3 officers. I probably didn't even know what the ranks were at the time. I suspect a superintendent, chief inspector, whatever. They asked me a load of questions. One of the questions was, you do realise that it's not all car chases, don't you? And and I sort of said, oh yeah, I realise that, but I think secretly I wanted it to be all car chases and everything. And then the word was that if they sent you for a chest X-ray, you'd passed. And lo and behold, myself and some others were put on a bus and taken to a local hospital where we had a chest X-ray. And the next thing I know, I got a letter saying that I was still 18 at the time. No, sorry, I would have been 17 at the time. No, I would have been 18 at the time. And they said, you can't join until you're 19. And so we'll notify you at a future date as to when you can start. And I went away thinking, right, I've got a year now. I'm going to have to find some work. So I went back and started working at my parents' holiday camp in the build up to the summer season of 75. And then I got a letter about 3 months later saying we've changed the policy and you can now join at 18 and a half. And they gave me a date in August of that year. And basically what it was is just like now, recruitment for the police was in a really bad way in the 70s, pretty much like it is now. And one of the reasons was that a lot of coppers had joined straight after the Second World War. It was 30 years really since the end of the war. They'd done national service or they served. They'd done their 30 years and they were coming up for retirement. So they were going to be losing a load of officers and nobody wanted to come in because the paying conditions were so bad. And what they realised though, back then the cadet force, the police cadet force was a big thing. I don't know what it was like in other forces around the country, but when you went to Hendon Training College, as a recruit, you went to the recruit end, but at the other end there was the cadet school, and it was a bit like, I'm guessing, like junior leaders in the army.
Yeah, it was a big thing, cadets.
You're kept in dormitories, you're paraded every morning. You did do some, so if you joined the, say, 16 and you hadn't passed all your O-levels, you still did do classroom work, but you'd go off and do adventure training in Wales. They had a high ropes course that was like a proper Trinasium. It was like on a par with what you got at Lympstone, they can rope swings and all that sort of stuff. They'd do attachments to police stations and, be part. So virtually every police station in London, there would be cadets who would be making tea and doing odd jobs around the building sort of thing. So yeah, the cadet school was a big thing. And I was that naive. I thought I was joining the cadets. I thought the cadets was like, I didn't realise there was a difference between a cadet and a recruit. It took me about a day at Hendon for people to go, no, mate, you're a recruit.
It's for real now.
You're not a gadget.
Sorry, mate.
So yeah, so that was it. I joined on the 11th of August, 1975. The recruitment's varied over the years, so that nowadays I think they take in like a big intake, but back then you just joined a class per week. So I think there was probably 20 of us initially, and there ended up about 12 of us, I suppose, passed off the parade square at the end of about 16 weeks of basic training. Quite a lot. I mean, a lot of it was studying, learning the law by rote. So even now, I can quote definitions of theft and robbery and burglary and all that, like I did, 50 years ago. So it worked. It was very regimented. You were paraded every morning, inspected. You were marched by the class captain, who was normally an ex-serviceman. Ours was a former Royal Marine, actually.
So both the police and fire service were quite military in their nature.
I think the fire brigade was, I understand that, I can't speak for all fire brigades, but I think the London Fire Brigade was quite heavily influenced by the Navy. Right. I think a lot of their drill is like the Navy.
Well, I take that's all gone now. They're not doing drill anymore.
Well, they've done away with training school. It's all sold. It's gone. Yeah. It's now flats. They do. Every police force does it slightly differently, but most of the old police colleges have all gone now.
They just start straight away now. They just start straight away now. We're not training.
I think it's learning on the job, a lot of it. And
it's a bit of online stuff, and
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't know enough about it to comment really, but I don't.
Must be pretty tough being a 18-year-old police officer. Like as in how much life experience you got of.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny going through training school. My upbringing helped me because I'd been packed off to an all boys boarding school at the age of 7. You know, I knew how to do hospital corners and polish my shoes and iron a shirt at that sort of age.
Yeah.
So homesickness, for instance, meant nothing to me. I just thrived in that environment. But there were kids that only lived for like 5 stops up on the Northern Line from Hendon who like dropped out week 1 because they were homesick. Bizarre. But yeah, I mean, I looked about 12. I really the local yobs used to call, when I went out to my first nick, used to call me schoolboy because I looked so young. Yeah. So yeah, and you just learn to live with it, really.
I take it then you do your first couple of years probation and then you're a bobby on the beat.
Yeah, so I got posted to Lewisham Police Station in South East London, which is a good, busy nick, good place to learn your profession, really. I think I obviously learnt it. I was quite a quick learner, despite the fact that I looked so young. I didn't. And back then, you didn't. Nowadays, if you tried to learn your spurs or earn your spurs, if you like I did in the 70s, you'd never be able to do it because you're just going to get the camera shoved in your face. But back then, fortunately, rightly or wrongly, we didn't have that. And if you spoke to a copper the way that coppers are spoken to now, they just got nicked, and that was it.
I think it was a bit like sort of life on Mars, sort of.
It was very life on Mars, and I'm not going to make excuses for it. It's just there was a degree of respect, and actually, I think the public wanted that. They didn't want the police to be abused.
Well, hopefully, it goes full circle again. I don't think it'll ever go full circle.
No, I don't think it'll ever go.
I think you'll get some changes again soon.
But I mean, there's one thing I always cite when people talk about the differences. There used to be an offence. I'm going to get this wrong, and probably ex-coppers will write into you, but I think it was section 121 of the Highways Act, but it was willfully obstructing the free passage of the highway. And it applied to just about everything. And so if, for instance, you had illegal street traders, that would park themselves in Oxford Street, open a suitcase and start selling things, then the public had to walk around them, so they were obstructing the free passage of the highway. You probably wouldn't need to arrest them because they'd have lookouts and all the rest of it, and they saw you coming, they'd leg it. But it also applied to a group of yobs hanging outside McDonald's. And you'd walk up and you go, right, lads, come on, it's not a meeting place. Fuck off. And that was the terminology you'd use. And one of them, who wanted to win his spurs, would go, you fucking tell me, fuck off. And so I've told you once, I only need to tell you another 2 times, now fuck off. And I go, well, what you going to do about it? And I went, right, are you going to fuck off? No, you're nicked. Boom. Now, they'd be arrested and they'd go to the police station, and there was no Crown Prosecution Service. They would be charged with willfully obstructing the free passage of the highway. And back when I first joined, they would be in court the very next day. And if they didn't meet the bail requirements, they would be in custody overnight at the police station. They'd be taken to court the following morning, and the magistrate would go, he'd get the guys, well, he didn't say what he said in his evidence, Your Worship. He just told me to fuck off. And the magistrate would go, well, you clearly didn't. £50 fine. The magistrates, it wasn't that long before I joined that magistrates' courts were actually called police courts. If you went into the foyer of Greenwich Magistrates Court, it was, on the floor in tiles, Greenwich Police Court. And so the magistrates looked upon their officers. If you got assaulted and the suspect got charged with, the defendant was charged with, assaulting a police officer, a lot of the magistrates, not all of them, some of the magistrates were quite anti-police, but a lot of the magistrates were like, you assaulted one of my officers. How dare you, And so it was a totally different time, and the public kind of
do a bit of that now.
Well, it would be nice to go back in the time machine.
Quite a lot of problems, actually.
But what happened was, and we're talking about footway obstruction, what happened, they brought in the Crown Prosecution Service. Now, the Crown Prosecution Service have probably never ever even heard of footway obstruction. And then, what's this footway obstruction? And some bean counter has gone, well, how much does it cost to take someone through the process? And what sort of fine are they going to get at it? Well, police officers would arrest people for footway obstruction, as they always had done. The Crown Police Prosecution Service would go, well, no, we're not going to do charges. So within a matter of months, police officers realised there was no point arresting someone and doing 2 hours paperwork for an offence that wasn't going to go to court. Now, if you then wind it forward 20, 30 years, we have a huge demonstration in Oxford Street and someone parks an enormous fucking pink yacht in the middle of the busiest junction in London, and like 200 coppers stand there, you know, with their thumbs up their arse going, well, what do we do about it? Because no one knows that it's still on the statute book, it's still an offence. So when they try, so then has to go to the Met Police solicitors, and they go, well, I don't think there's any offence that covers this. Whereas when I was a young copper, that boat would have been there for about half an hour. It'd been there long enough for us to find someone to come along and tow it away, you know, and the person would have appeared in court. So, you know, if you don't use a law, they'll
just get rid of it.
It just disappears off the statute books. And it was such a fundamental thing. And of course, you know, if you're a bean counter, you don't realise how important it is for a police officer to have the presence to go up to a group and go, right, you need to Foxtrot Oscar now. And for them to go, all right, mate, and go. You know, you can't, without some form of respect and without some sort of, you know, support from the law, you can't do regular police work. And that's what they've eroded to the point where now, you know, they just ignore coppers.
Oh, bit by bit, the powers are being diminished.
Yeah, they've just been slowly chipped away. I mean, that was just one example of one law that used to be used literally daily by coppers, certainly.
Did you feel the turning point when you feel like the respect had gone from the public? Because I remember growing up, you'd be like, you see a cop, you're like, well, yeah, everyone plays the game, and it's certainly now you can just see that like a massive lack of respect from most of the public.
So I did, as I said, I went to Lewisham Police Station at the end of 1975. I couldn't actually go out on the street until February 1976 because I wasn't I had to wait until I was 19, to my 19th birthday. And so I was a street duty copper, mainly walking a beat for like the first few years of my service. Then I got a driving course and drove a bit. And then after I'd been at Lewisham for 5 years, I joined a unit called the Special Patrol Group, which was also called Smash, Punch and Grab, or Sweep, Plant and Grab, or whatever. But they were considered like the Met's QRF, for want of a better word. And so wherever there was trouble spots, you know, where there was let's say there was a big burglary problem in a certain area, then the SPG would come in and swamp the ground, do lots of stop and search, arrest lots of suspects, you know, do a bit of plainclothes, do a bit of surveillance work. But you covered the whole of London, and if there was a riot, or even if there was a missing child, and you just needed a lot of resources to search for him, for instance, the SPG would get involved. That's where I did my initial firearms training, because if you're on the SPG, you're pretty well guaranteed you're going to get what we called a shots course. But so all the way through that service, that respect was still there, and it was certainly there on the SPG, because the blue van turned up. You didn't even need to tell them to fuck off; they just legged it.
Gone.
So I did the SPG for 3 years, and then I went on the firearms unit, and I was on that for about 12 years. And then I had to go back to do regular police duty in the mid-90s. And when I went back in the mid-90s, it had changed. There was the Crown Prosecution Service. You know, we now had to do tape-recorded interviews, and an awful lot of the procedural stuff had changed, and that had diminished the respect to a degree, but it was still there, you know. And then I went back in the firearms unit literally 14 months later. So I saw out the rest of my career in the firearms unit. So although I knew as part of the organisation that respect wasn't there in the way it was when I first joined, it never really affected me as a copper, because, you know, I had a gun. So, you know, people did what they were told.
A bit more respect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you wasn't kind of a Bobby on the beat anymore.
No, exactly. So funnily enough, I had to do a lecture one day to a load of people that had applied to join the unit, and it was at Scotland Yard, and a female chief inspector very naively asked if I would be prepared to go and talk to them about being a specialist firearms officer. And they had someone from the armed response vehicles, and they had someone from the instructional side, and they had a female officer, and, you know, so to give them a balance of what the department was like. And at the end, they threw it out to questions from the audience, and a little voice. There was all sorts of stupid questions like, "Oh, did you get much overtime?" You know, and, you know, do I get a big gun or a little gun? And some bloke at the back said, "I know what's a good day for me as a street duty copper. What's a good day for you as a firearms officer?" And I said,
good question.
Nobody answered the question. So I kind of looked at the female chief inspector that was hosting it, and I said, "I'll ask that." Actually, and she looked quite relieved. And I said to the audience, there must have been about 50 people in the audience, I said, "Right, we all know in this room that we have fucking lost it as an organisation, don't we? And like everyone looked a bit puzzled. And I said, well, you know, you don't command the respect that you should. No. You know, general public, you know, it's just not the same job that it was certainly when I joined. And everyone was sort of nodding in agreement. And I looked at the chief inspector and she was just had her head in her hands, like, you know, she was just, oh my God, what's he going to say? And I said, so when you need us, when you call us because you're dealing with a suspect with a firearm or someone who's otherwise so dangerous that it's beyond your capability, because of the very nature of firearms work, health and safety basically means that you have to create a sterile environment for us. So when we go in to deal with that suspect who's fucked you around, you know, and who makes your life hell, I said, just for 15 minutes until we've searched his premises and handed him over to you, he's our little puppy, you know. And I tell you what satisfies me, when you've got someone that's stuck a gun in a unarmed police officer's face and you've got him cuffed up on the floor and you stand him up and there's a piss stain spreading across the front of his trousers. So that's what satisfies me, that bloke's been put back in his box, you know. And it was almost like a cheer. People started clapping. And I looked at this woman chief inspector and she was just shaking her head in disdain. She was like, I didn't want it to say
not asking this go back.
But yeah, so...
I don't even feel like, obviously don't get into this too much, but I don't think it's even just a disrespect to the police now. It's a societal thing anyway.
Yeah,
There's not like people don't respect the elders like they used to and stuff like that. It's just you know, the culture has changed.
I mean, do you remember Ken Livingstone? Yeah. Ken Livingstone, Red Ken. I remember when he was the mayor of London, he actually said something that for once I agreed with. And he said, you know, when you think about when we all grew up, it was a world of adults. Yeah. If you got on a bus, there was a bus conductor. Yeah. And if you messed around upstairs on the bus, you got clipped around the ear or you got kicked off the bus.
Straight off the bus,
Or there were bus inspectors.
They wouldn't even have dared to do it now.
No. You know, when you went to kick the ball around the rec, there was a park keeper. Yeah, of course. You know, you might consider he was a wanker and shout at him, but if he started, as an adult, if he started coming towards you or shouted out, I know where you live, you legged it, you know. And that's the world that we grew up in. Yeah. And that world sadly doesn't exist anymore.
I'm sure some people watching this might counter my thinking, but it does seem why policing's not, loads of reasons, policing's not in great shape, but it obviously does seem there's a lot less police officers these days than it used to be.
Well, there is.
And like dramatically.
And so when I joined the Metropolitan Police, there was 27,000 officers in the Met. And I think we're now something like 32,000 officers in the Met. It's not a huge amount, but we've gone from we've gone from a city of about 7 million to 10 million, nearly 10 million people. There's 300 languages spoken in London. But the other big thing is that crime has changed totally. You know, we lived in a much simpler world. There was no mobile phones, there was no cameras, there was no CCTV. So when I patrolled the streets, crime was very simple. It was like street robbery, burglary, theft, shoplifting, car theft. It was all just simple, you know, I want that person's car, I'm going to steal it, you know. But now, you had fraud, and detectives would deal with fraud and check fraud and people bouncing stolen checks and things like that. But society has changed with technology, and now a high percentage of the crime that the police have to investigate isn't as simple as sending people out on the streets to catch someone in a stolen car or catch someone climbing in through someone's window. You know, so they've had to take all of these resources off of the street to the point where, you know, we used to parade like 20 officers to cover like probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 square miles. Yeah. Now you've got the same amount of officers to cover like one whole quarter of London. Yeah, you know, responding to 999 calls, and it's just
that's the same across the country as well.
Yeah, like absolutely.
They've either lost, like the local police station's gone, and then you don't. Even in our little town, you used to see the odd copper. You just don't see. I'm
going to get these figures wrong because I'm shit with numbers, but I think there's something in the region of 32 police stations in London now. There used to be you're only talking about 15 years ago. There was something like 176 police stations.
No wonder, is it?
Yeah.
If you think the public then, with obviously being dramatically less numbers, you're only seeing police in a negative situation. Yeah. So there's no positive. There's no like community.
So I walked the beat for my first 5 years of my service, and my local knowledge was awesome. I could wander around Brockley, New Cross, Deptford, Lewisham now, and I know exactly where all the alleyways are. because I walked down them. And I walked down them at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I walked down, and there was...
Not all the bad guys.
I would go into little local corner cafes, and I knew the people in there, and they'd make me a cup of tea, or I might even sit there and have a full English, and locals would come in. And I used to like doing it because I thought it was a bit New York coppish. Yeah. Like most coppers would go back to the Nick, and I did as well, go back to the police canteen and have breakfast. Yeah. But if I was out on foot patrol, I wasn't going to walk all the way back to the Lewisham Nick. I'd have it locally. And so you got chatting to people, and I'd loved going into places where normal coppers never went. There was a snooker hall. I don't know what it was. I don't know what the connection was, but Burton's gents clothing shops, remember them?
Yeah.
I think they even exist still, but a high percentage of them, certainly in London, always had a snooker hall above them.
Yeah, I don't know what
the connection was. But Lewisham was exactly the same. In Lewisham High Street, there was a Burton's and a snooker hall above it, and it was a proper magnet for villains. It's like a lot of the street robbers would run in there. It was predominantly white kids, with a smattering of young black criminals, but it was mainly a white criminals venue. The street traders would go in there, but it was a bit of a no-go area for coppers, especially if you look like you were 19 or 20 and you looked about 12. But I would make a point of going in there, and I'd always get a bit of abuse, and I'd always end up, basically taking them outside by the scruff of the neck and taking them down the alleyway at the back and read them their future. You might want to reconsider the way you talk to me when you see me next time round, sort of thing. And I used to love going in there, and I'd go in the morning when the cleaners were still in there, when market traders were still setting up, before there were any punters in there. And I got to know the people behind the jump, and they'd tell me who'd been going in and out. And there's just that local knowledge of there's a bloke who was in here yesterday with a striped jumper. What's his name? Oh, everybody calls him, and they'd have a nickname for him or something. And then I'd find out who that nickname belonged to, and I'd go to the collators and I'd get his card out, and I'd go, all right, okay. And I'd say, well, who does he hang around with? And I just had this whole depth of local knowledge. And when someone bailed out of a stolen car at 3 o'clock in the morning after a car chase, I would know where that alley was, and I'd know where it came out.
That intelligence is gone, isn't it?
But nowadays you've got coppers that they don't know who the local villains are because they're covering such a vast area. They don't have collators offices like they used to. So the intelligence cells, and we've got all of this legislation now that restricts the information that can be given out about individuals. So I can't even imagine how difficult it must be to do the job if you don't even know the geography of the ground that you're on.
Tough.
Yeah, really tough.
So going on to the firearms, what attracted you to that when you talked about being into that stuff when you were a bit younger?
I grew up in Sussex. It was a seaside village. It was a bit of a dead-end village. It's a place called Middleton-on-Sea. And so there's one road in, but you've got to come out the same road. Yeah. And but it's surrounded by countryside. In the summer, it was busy because it was like a holiday resort. But in the winter, it was just dead. And so me and my mates would have air rifles or whatever. Or go on the holiday camp because it was like your own little CQB village, cutting around shooting tin cans with air rifles and all that sort of stuff. So I was always into shooting. And then when I was old enough to get a shotgun certificate, I got a shotgun. And then I joined a pistol club and started shooting 2.2 pistol. I got a firearms certificate. So I was always into guns. So was your ambition to go firearms as soon as you were in the police? And was that always part of my interest in joining the police was because I knew that I didn't know much about police and firearms, but I did know that some police officers were trained in the use of firearms. And so it was something that I always fancied doing. And I remember once the selection process now to become a firearms officer means that you have to apply to be a firearms officer, and you go through a selection process. But there was no such selection process when I joined the job. Every police station, every main police station on a division had a safe in the front office with like 6 Smith & Wesson Model 10 revolvers and a few plastic case guards full of 38 special ammunition. And you had what were known as divisional shots. And they were normally older guys or guys that were perhaps, in their late 20s or 30s, but they'd started their career in central London where there was a lot of fixed posts. So there was a lot of embassies to stand outside of or whatever. So back then in the 70s, you've got people who had been given a shots course as a probationer, simply because they needed to cover all of these protection posts. And then they'd get married, or, they'd move out to an outer division. But there was no, that there probably was, this division should have so many authorised shots. But I remember sitting in the canteen one day and a sergeant came in with a clipboard and he went, right, Bob, you used to be in the army, didn't you? Do you want a shots course? And Bob went, no, I've done all that. No, not interested. How about you? Anyone else want a shots course? And, I put my hand up and he just looked straight through me. Like, I'm not giving a gun to you, like in 12-year-old. And some other bloke, and he went, I'm not doing anything next week, I'll do it, And that's the way that shots were picked. And when you went on the special patrol group, literally day one on the special patrol group, I'd arrived. I went to see my new inspector, and he said, "You're from Lewisham, aren't you?" And I went, "Yeah." He goes, "There's a." He said, "Do you know Greenwich's ground?" I said, "Well, it borders on Lewisham. I know it reasonably well." He said, "I don't know if you heard." He said, "But a copper got stabbed in A&E in Greenwich, and the only reason he didn't die was because he was actually in A&E when he got stabbed. But we're putting a squad together to go and arrest this suspect. Do you know such and such?" And he named this young black kid's name, and I went, "Yeah, I know him." He said, "Right, go and see Sergeant Bunning." He said, and he said you can go out with him. You can help him find this bloke. Oh, okay. So I went and saw Sergeant Bunning, and Sergeant Bunning is there with the firearms register, and people are like checking weapons and showing the weapons clear and showing the serial number, and he's writing them all down. And he goes, he says, "You're the new lad." And he said, "You come from Lewisham, didn't you?" He goes, "Do you know this bloke?" And I went, "Yeah." He said, "Right, draw yourself a gun, go and get in civvies." And I said, "I'm not a shot." He goes, "Not a shot?" He goes, "You're no good to me unless you're a shot." He said, "Well, you can drive." I said, "I'm suspended from driving." Oh, no. He went, "I'm going to have to sort that out." He said, "Oh, just fuck off and get in plain clothes." And anyway, we went out and looked for this suspect. And by the time we'd wandered around for about 6 hours looking for this guy, someone else had nicked him, and it was job done. But very shortly afterwards, they put me on a retest to drive so I could drive. About a year later, I eventually got a shots course. But yeah, it was just... It was, yeah. And nowadays, I think the minimum firearms course in the Met, if you want to go to Pad P, which is the guys that you see standing outside Westminster and standing outside the Israeli embassy and things like that, I think it's something in the region of 8 weeks. Right. Where you are, up in somewhere like Derbyshire, because a firearms officer in a small county force will do a bit of everything, you'll probably find that their initial course is probably like 18 weeks or something like that. Back when I did my shots course, it was 5 days.
Oh,
5 days, yeah. 4 days on an indoor range, classifying at 25 yards, 15 yards and 7 yards. And then on the final day, you had a day of tactics.
That's all just on a revolver, sidearm.
Smith & Wesson, 6-shot revolver. And then you, on the last day, you got driven up to an old Second World War prisoner of war camp in Lippets Hill in Epping Forest in Essex. And they gave you a day of tactics-ish. I mean, it was more like a half day, to be honest, and it didn't really teach you anything that you...
So that's changed for the better now then.
Oh, massively. So, but all of these things improve in increments after disasters.
Yeah.
So, there'll be a fuck up and an innocent member of the public will get shot and they'll add a week's training. Yeah. Then something else will happen and, we'll have to improve the selection process. And so, yeah, we are where we are off the back of mistakes and errors and working parties and things like that. So, yeah, it's a totally different beast now to what it was when I did it.
So your initial shots course then for you was just 5 days.
Yeah.
So which was firing a revolver.
Yeah.
Said.
Yeah.
I don't seem like a long length of time to be it's difficult to hit anything with a revolver.
I have to say that the quality of instruction, and I'm not just saying this because I went on to become an instructor, but the quality of instruction was really, really good. And it was, even back then, I mean, you guys are ex-military, and I suspect through most of your service, the pistol was just not really a military bit of kit.
No.
It was something that, let's say you're on the op banner, You're doing your pre-deployment training. You probably give you a Browning and like one magazine and like have a little black down there. And if you know how to go through your NSPs, you know how to unload it, make it safe and all the rest of it. That was it. You're safe. So when you're on a vehicle checkpoint, you've got your clipboard and you're the bloke that's got to go forward and tap on the window. You've got your pistol with you, know how to use it. With the police, albeit it was only like 5 days of training or 4 days of training, it was quite intensive, and you put a lot of rounds down in that time. And it was all about accuracy, so you had a scoring zone, you had to get your shots within that scoring zone. I'll give you an example. I was a couple of years after I joined the SPG, I did my shots course. I was applied for the Firearms unit, which was called D11 at the time, and I did a 6-week national instructors course, cadre, and then I joined the unit. And at the time we'd gone from a 1-week course to a 2-week course, and I was on the way to the training area in a coach, and I've got about 5 students in the coach with me, and another instructor, and it's day 1 of this 2-week course, and I've got all the files for the 12 odd students that are going to be on the course. Some have gone direct in their own transport. And so me and my oppo were just going through these things, and it was like a pro forma that everyone filled in. Told you how much rank they had, how much service they had, what their rank was, what their current job was, any prior firearms experience, any prior military experience. And you got, the usual sort of thing. I used to be in the Air Cadets and I once fired a 303, And but then there's this one, fucking hell. And there's this bloke, we'll call him Jones, and it said 5 years Royal Green Jackets, 5 years B Squadron, 22 SAS. And I went, is that PC Jones here? And this bloke turns around, he said, yeah, that's me. He said, yeah, come back here, mate. He came back, I said, you're on B Squadron? He went, yeah. I said, do you know Mel Parry? Yeah, he was a striker. Yeah. I said, do you know so-and-so? He goes, yeah. I said, were you on the Iranian? He said, yeah, mate. He said, I was an assaulter on the Iranian, yeah? I know. Mate, he failed his basic Mets firearms course.
No.
He absolutely dug out, like all the tactics, he was brilliant. He'd be up to his nose in mud, crawling through a ditch to get into position. He paid attention, but he could no more hit a target than he could hit a cow's arse with a banjo, mate. It was awful, really awful. I mean, he was literally at 25 yards. The rounds were skipping off the ground at the 15-yard line.
Different skill set,
And our coach, anyway, he failed on the last day, and we were absolutely mortified because obviously, the bloke, ex-fucking SAS, for Christ's sakes. And afterwards, back in the day, there wasn't that much paperwork that there is now. So we would join the students, those that passed and those that failed, in the local pub that was on the other side of the gate, the main gates into the training camp. And we cornered this lad, Jones. And we were like really apologetic. Sorry, mate, we really, were pushing for you to pass and everything. He said, look, don't worry about it. He goes, I've got to be honest. He goes, I was always an awful pistol shot. He said, you're the only people who ever tried to actually coach me to shoot a pistol. I've met people that knew him since. And I said, did you know a bloke called so-and-so? And they go, oh, yeah, he was fucking dire with a pistol. And he'd go everyone else would be sitting outside with their bag rats at lunchtime, and he'd be, take a liner and 9mm in the CQB range and just be shooting just to try and keep up. But it was just never his thing. And it's only really in the last probably in the last 20 years that Special Forces have actually taken on pistols and actually put a lot of effort into upping their skill on it. It was, even in Special Forces, it was seen as just something where you carry it, but you've got an MP5 or you've got an M4 or whatever,
For the general public, they would, Hollywood sort of film style, you would, and people are shooting, obviously America, they're obviously more proficient with firearms than we are. It looks an easy thing.
You'd like to think so.
Yeah.
Theoretically, I suppose. But it is very, it's a difficult...
The pistol's a particularly difficult weapon. There's just so many things that make it different from shooting a rifle, as you know.
You've done a fair bit, didn't you, at Northwood?
Yeah, I did a little bit. That's to say,
otherwise we don't barely touch it.
At 10 metres, to hit an accurate headshot is not easy.
No, well, I mean, certainly, I would expect to hit headshots at 25 metres with a pistol, which, is... that's on someone that's not shooting back, obviously. Just a bit of cardboard down the range. But yeah, I mean, and I was saying, that actually for me personally, that old Smith & Wesson 4-inch revolver was more accurate than a Glock. Yeah, I could certainly get better groups with that than I got with a Glock. But
what was your favourite weapon to shoot?
Well, probably a revolver. When I joined D11 as an instructor, operationally you had a choice between what weapons you carried. You had a Browning high power, or in my case a Smith & Wesson Model 19 Combat Magnum. But we only fired 38 special out of it. But for accuracy, and because of the type of ammunition that we used, so my first shooting was in 1985, and that was a hostage situation where a man was holding a little girl hostage at knife point. And at the time, we'd just gone over to soft point ammunition for the 38 special for the revolver, which the press would obviously call dum-dums, but, but in our Brownings, we were still firing 9mm 2Z full metal jacket. And I made a decision on the morning to draw my revolver because my attitude was, I don't need firepower. I don't need 13 rounds. This guy's got a knife. 6 shots and a reload should do.
So you make that choice as an individual, do you?
Yeah, back then, yeah. I mean, now they don't have a choice. You've got one pistol and you've got one carbine and that's it. But back then it was a personal choice. Yeah. And we didn't have day-to-day access to MP5s back in 1985. All our MP5s were full auto, and they required authority from the Home Secretary.
And you wouldn't take that on a job like that?
Well, you could if you only fired a single shot, which we only would have done anyway. But because the Home Office authorised the acquisition of those weapons with that full auto capability, they were restricted to CT use. So we couldn't use them for day-to-day ops back then.
So that was your first firing an anger incident, then, was it, that one?
Yeah, for want of a better word, yeah. The guy had held the little girl hostage for about 24 hours at least, and he'd murdered the child's mother, stabbed her 16 times and thrown her body out, I think, and then he held a little girl hostage and tortured her in front of the negotiators. So, I mean, I don't think we picked up on it at the time, but certainly as a result of what he said in his evidence at court, because he survived, although I'd shot him in the brain, he basically suffered the similar effects that you'd get from a stroke. I shot him in the right temple. And
just one shot?
No, so I fired 3 shots. But the first 2 shots, I couldn't be guaranteed I'd hit him because the room was in darkness and we didn't have lights on our weapon back then. And he was black, the little girl was black, so literally all I could see were their eyes and their teeth. And I could just about make out the shape of his shoulder. So I fired a pair of shots at the furthest point away from the little girl, which was basically his shoulder. One round went through his jacket and the other one went into his shoulder, or he had the knife up, so it kind of went underneath the arm and through the fleshy part of there. And then he flinched and he turned his head and I took a shot at his temple.
What range was this?
What range? About as far away as I am from you, matter of feet really.
And this was when you were part of a specialist firearm unit at this point?
Yeah.
Which was called, you said? What?
At the time it was called D11. And the reason it was called D11 was because it was D department. And so D11 was created as a unit in 1967. Remember what I said earlier about, advancement always happens as a result of tragedies. The year before, less than a year after we'd done away with the death penalty, and about 2 weeks after we'd won the 1966 World Cup, 3 police officers were murdered in one incident. They stopped a vehicle, a detective sergeant, a detective constable, and a advanced driver in an unmarked vehicle, did a routine stop on a vehicle, and all 3 were shot dead within a matter of seconds. And they made off, and there was a manhunt. 2 of the suspects were arrested quite quickly, but a guy by the name of Harry Roberts, I don't know if that name means anything to you, but Harry Roberts, was the most infamous, cop killer for many, many, many years. And so he went to ground, and he, like most men of his age at that time, had done national service. He'd fought in Malaya, so he had a little bit of knowledge about how to survive in the wild. And I think he was adrift for about, I'm going to guess now, but probably about 4 months before he was eventually captured. But as a direct result of the inquiry into that, because at that time there wasn't even a 1 week basic firearms course, it was literally, you used to be in the mob, didn't you? Yeah, have a Webley revolver, off you go. They created D11 as a firearms training unit. And so for the first 8 years, that's all they did. They trained anyone that carried a gun in London. But the mid-70s and the early 70s, 1972, what happened in 1972? Any guesses? Munich Olympic Games, the Munich thing. So that was the kind of birth of counter-terrorism. So GSG9 were formed, RAID was formed, 22 SAS were given the UK responsibility for mainland counter-terrorism. Special Boat Service, as tiny as it was then, was given the job of the oil rigs and all that sort of stuff. And in 1975, a formal letter came through, November of 1975, came through from the Home Secretary giving the Commissioner authority to create a counter-terrorist team out of the D11 instructors, most of whom were ex-military. And so that's how it was formed. But D Department was still training. And then in 1987, it had a name change and it became PT-17. And PT stood for Personnel and Training, so it still came under training. And then in 1991, because again, more police officers have been shot and killed. I think I'm right in saying in the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, the Metropolitan Police lost more police officers killed in the line of duty than either Los Angeles or New York in the same time period together. And so it was like, as there always is with these things, there was after the Harry Roberts shooting, there was a call to arm the police. Arm the police, arm the police. So, all right, well, let's just give better training to the shots we've got. And then it was like, we've had a particularly bad couple of years. Arm the police, arm the police. Let's form armed response vehicles. So that's what they did. They created the armed response vehicles in 91. They put them under the umbrella of our unit, but because now the balance was more on the operational side than it was on the training side, we went to SO, or Special Operations. We became SO19. And from that point, we've maintained the training role. It's still down at Gravesend in Kent. There's a big training facility where all firearms officers are trained. And all the instructors come under MO19 as they are now. But yeah, you've still got the armed response vehicles. You've still got the specialist teams.
What's the size of SO19?
I'm going to say something like 600 plus. I think. I'm a little bit out of date, but when I joined it, there was about just under 40 of us. So it's massively changed. But all of those divisional shots, just the guys that you would run into the police station to book a gun out when there was a robbery, none of those, they don't exist anymore. Anyone carrying a gun is now a full-time gun user.
Seems a smart way of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's for skill feed. And
Absolutely, yeah. And they go back, I don't know how many times they go back. I mean, certainly the armed response vehicles, I think they go back every 7 weeks for like 4 days training, but then they'll do ad hoc training in the meantime. So between full training packages, they'll also get time on the range and stuff. So
the massive responsibility, obviously, having a weapon, and if you're just having people in a station that,
Yeah. I mean, I remember as a young copper, I was out in the station yard and I wasn't carrying a radio at the time because I was what we call the ASO, which was the Assistant Station Officer. And I'd just gone outside to have a cup of tea and take a break because not much was happening. And I wasn't aware that a robbery call had come over the radio and a Panda car, Austin Allegra or something, came screaming in the yard. The driver jumped out. He ran into the building. I was like, something's happening. And then some guys ran out of the canteen, which was a separate part of the building, jumped in this bloke's car and drove off, wheel spin, the whole lot. And then 20 seconds later, the copper that had driven the car in comes running out with like a belt and a holster and a gun in one hand and a box of ammunition in the other. Goes, where's my fucking car? And the other lads had heard it call come up on the radio and stolen his car. So he had the guns and the bullets and everything. And he was stuck in the yard without any transport. I mean, that's how crazy it was,
I was going to ask that. So for that first incident for you, were you just the only firearms copper there on that?
No.
Was there a team of you?
So what happened is that by that time we were starting to get used more and more. 1985 was so I joined in 83 and people were still guys on the teams were still talking about jobs that they'd done 2 years ago, do you remember the old Tottenham job? Do you remember this job and that job? They might do like 4 or 5 jobs a year, perhaps. Our main job was doing like high-profile security for things like prisoner runs to court for the IRA and stuff like that, showing a presence. We'd stand there with our shotguns or MP5s on show or whatever, with our berries at a jaunty angle. But slowly but surely, we started to get used increasingly by divisional commanders that didn't want to use their own under-trained shots. Yeah. And I think a lot of that was, well, if we call in like the experts and they fuck up, it's not our fault. Yeah. You know, we can say we called in the right people for the job. Yeah. So we started getting used to the point where we were struggling to maintain our training role. So in 1987, they brought in a group of non-instructors for the first time to man up the teams, and they were called level 2 teams, and the instructors were level 1 teams. But in 1985, when I had my first shooting, the instructors were just split into 4 teams: red, blue, orange, and green. I was on blue team. It was over Christmas, so they had a skeleton team, they had a standby team, which was red team, and red team came in and did a 12-hour tour, but then they obviously had to be stood down, so they rang around. We only had enough pages for one team, so they literally ran round everyone at home. And I was it's my son's, I think it's going to be my son's 4th birthday on Boxing Day, and I get a phone call on Christmas Day saying, "Look, if this siege, you might have seen it on the telly. If it goes on, are you able to come in?" Yeah. And my missus is like, "No." I'm going, "Well, it should be all right." You know, thinking that siege it's unlikely, but also thinking, bank holiday, double time. So, next thing you know, in the morning, we haven't been cancelled. So we went in, and I remember driving in with a mate, and that's when we discussed what guns we were going to carry, and we decided we were going to carry revolvers because we knew it was going to be tight. We knew it was going to be a little small flat because we'd been watching it on the news, and we decided we didn't want our rounds to over-penetrate. But it was a mixed team, so there was about 3 or 4 of us from blue team and some others from green team. That's quite an
important thing brought up there, and obviously it's quite recent with recent events up in Manchester about the knowing where your shots are going to go if they do go through someone. And
absolutely.
It's just things like the public probably would overlook and just think, oh no, you're going to shoot at someone. It's just that's all you're worrying about. But you're looking at where this rounds are going to go.
We all know that you need to be mindful of your backstop, but taking it forward to the event you're talking about in Manchester, I got a text message from a journalist that morning saying, "Would you be prepared to come on radio and talk about the incident in Manchester?" Well, I knew nothing about the incident in Manchester. So another journalist contacts me and sends me a picture, and it's the picture that I'm sure you've all seen of him standing on the steps. Yeah. And you can see the suicide, or what we thought was a suicide belt, and I think he's got his phone in his hand at the time. And the question this journalist asked is, does it look to you like he's wearing body armour? So I looked at his face, and I looked at his neck, and I looked at all the places that you would look for to see body armour. And obviously in doing so, I noticed the vest and all the rest of it. But the front of the building ground floor was almost completely black, wasn't it? Because it was blacked out windows, blacked out. And I didn't register at all that he was standing in front of some doors. And it was only after we discovered, like 2 days later, after it was already news that their bullets had actually killed one member of the congregation and wounded another, that I revisited the picture and looked at it again and noticed that right next to his head was a door, was a window in the door, and you can it's quite haunting actually. You can see the faces of the congregation behind. Now, I didn't see that. No. Studying a picture with a cup of coffee in my hands, sitting like we are now on a sofa, under no stress whatsoever. And if you think about it, even if the cops arrived on scene, the moment they see that suicide vest,
split second.
It got a split second to fire the shot, because if he clacks himself off, we're all dead. Yeah. So they wouldn't have even if they'd have seen the hostages behind, which I doubt they probably would have done, they wouldn't have even had time to change angles or even perhaps drop to the kneeling position and take a headshot. I don't know. But I mean, I don't know, and none of us will know until the inquiry as to whether or not the shot over-penetrated or, if more than one shot was fired, because that's another thing.
I didn't see that person until you pointed it out.
No.
I saw you'd mentioned it.
That was you, because I put it on Instagram, didn't I? But if you fire 2 headshots into a target on a range, you go in a CQB range and there's a target with hostages on either side, and you come up and you plonk your sights on it and you go ba-bat, and your 2 shots go like that. And on you doing the debrief and you're doing the walkthrough, go, two nice headshots, Tone. Yeah. That wouldn't have been 2 headshots. Yeah. For reality, you're never going to get a double tap in the head, because even however quick you fire those 2 shots, he will have if you've got a brain shot, he's going to start to fall after the first shot, and the second shot is going to go over his head. Yeah. Almost guaranteed. And you see this in shoot, no shoot videos. You fire like 2 or 3 shots in rapid succession. And if it's one of these, modern computer generated type things where it registers the hits and the subject starts to fall, guarantee your follow-up shots aren't going to hit the suspect. They're probably going to go over his shoulder or hit a hostage or, someone in the backdrop or whatever, So it's a very, very difficult situation.
Fine margins.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
After your first shooting then, was it like it is now, where you lose your weapon, you suspended a bit? And
It was bizarre. It was really bizarre. No one wanted to talk about it. And one of the reasons was that it wasn't an authorised assault. We had an authorised assault plan, and the deliberate plan was, and it was only on authorisation from the commander. If the commander on-scene commander decided, right, I want you to intervene, then our plan was to attack the front door with sledgehammers, because we had no explosive breaching or shotgun breaching or anything more than sophisticated than a sledgehammer back then. And that would be our primary entry point. So we'd breach it, flashbang it, and go in. But in the event of a failed breach, those of us coming from the green end of the balcony would be going in through the kitchen window, and those coming from the red end of the balcony would be going in through the bathroom window, which is only a small window. But what happened was, we put forward a plan, because he kept coming out on the balcony, this bloke, and he kept acting up to a massive crowd that was downstairs. And the crowd was predominantly black. He was black. We'd had riots only a matter of months before, where a police officer had been murdered. 1985, yeah.
Brixton riots. Yeah.
Was that? I'm trying to think whether that was 85 or 87. But we'd had a bad year for riots, and the powers that be, I mean, I've never had them say this, but I can absolutely see why they would be paranoid about causing another riot. And they thought that if we shot this black man, that there would be a riot. But they completely misread the soundings, for want of a better word, because actually the black crowd were angry because a black woman had been murdered, a little black girl had been held hostage by a black man with a knife, and in their eyes, we weren't doing anything about it. They said, if he's a white person, they'd have rescued him by now. They'd have done something by now. So, of course, we'd been marginalised, and we were back at either end of the balcony. This guy was coming out more and more. And so we came up with a plan, which we put forward to the senior officers to say, look, we can get him. We can get between him and the door. If he comes out on the balcony without the child, which he's doing on a fairly regular basis, if we can get between him and the door, he ain't got a hostage anymore. Job done. Yeah. And the on-scene commander came upstairs with our boss, and he said to those of us at that end of the balcony, what's this plan then? And I said, well, boss, explained it to him, and he went, no, denied, and just turned around and walked off. So we then started to finesse it. We were talking to each other on our own net, which is only our net. And our boss came back up and said, you were told that plan, that it's not approved. And we said, well, sir, we're trying to finesse it. We're trying to make it more acceptable as a plan. We're trying to improve upon it. And we were basically denied permission to do it. But then what happened is the suspect came out on his own with a knife. And this time, our sniper, who was, I think, described him as moving tactically, because instead of just coming out and talking to the crowd and big time in it, he went into a crouch and he started to sprint towards the stairwell where myself and my colleague were. And the guys at the other end of the balcony think, fucking hell, he's going for it. He's going to try and leg it out of here with a knife and, hack his way out. So they broke cover, unauthorised, to try and beat him to the door. He wasn't trying to escape. What he did was he grabbed hold of a riot shield that he'd seen abandoned and was taking that back in to reinforce his barricades inside the flat. So it was like two opposing forces coming towards each other. There's three guys from one end of the balcony trying to beat him to the door. He throws the riot shield in their face. Talking about tunnel vision, the bloke thought he'd broken his finger, but he didn't know what had done it. It was only when he watched the video afterwards he realised this bloke had a full-length riot shield. But he gets in and he slams the door shut. And then we hear a load of shouting from my end of the balcony. We're like, what the fuck's going on? I stuck my head out and I can see them around the front door. So me and my mate run up towards them. My mate produces a stun grenade. I've got a stun grenade. I'm looking at him going, well, I don't know what the fuck's going on here. But you guys obviously know what's happening. So he posted a grenade through the toilet window. I posted a grenade through the kitchen window. My mate, in the meantime, was hacking away at the door. So we just basically went for option 2, and I went in through and all it was is I had the clearest run into the living room. I had the biggest window. He'd torn all the internal doors off the hinges, and he'd turned the kitchen into a bit of an obstacle course. And he'd connected the door handle up to the mains and various other bits and pieces. But I think the stun grenade disrupted everything. I mean, our stun grenades back then, they were actually grenade simulators. They were supposed to simulate an L2 grenade. They looked like a big L2 grenade. And I mean, if I threw one in this room now, it would take all the glass out, all the glass in all these doors, everything had gone. The overpressures were phenomenal. And that's what happened. So it blew the light bulbs, which is why I didn't have any light in the thing. So
and that was it. And then you're in.
Yeah, and that was him. Yeah.
Did you get any trouble?
Oh, yeah, so that's what we were talking about. So basically at the end of it, it was like no one really wants to talk about this. So we all went back to, bearing in mind it's Christmas time, over the Christmas holiday. So we went back to the nearest police station, which was Southall. We found an empty office, which was a CID office, and we settled on that because they had a fridge with some milk in it and some tea making stuff. So we knocked up a brew and we started to write our notes. And then we were told we couldn't go home because the commander wanted to come and see us. And the commander, a guy called Sparks, eventually turns up and basically let us know that he was given a press interview apparently, and had reassured the press that we were going to wait this out. We were going to play the long game. There was going to be no assault. And then someone from the press said, well, there's policemen with guns on the balcony now. And he didn't even turn around. He just went, yeah, don't worry about that. They're saying, boom, the stun grenades go off. And he said, when your stun grenades went off, he said, my first instinct was that you would all be out of a job tomorrow morning. He said, but I've been to the hospital and you'll be happy to hear that the little girl, although quite seriously injured, is going to survive. And more importantly, so is the suspect, and therefore you have my full backing. Yeah. So I literally we went back to the base. I'd driven us into work, so I drove home. And it was about 5 or 6 years later, I was having a conversation, and I said, to be honest, I don't think I was particularly stressed by the whole thing. I thought I was pretty chilled. And my mate went, you're fucking joking, aren't you? Yeah. I thought I was going to have to stop you because you went through red lights, you were breaking the speed limit. I was just like, clearly, like, you know. But so Christmas period, so I came back to work, first sort of working day after Christmas. I walked across the yard to the armourer's shop and said, I need a new revolver. He issued me with a new revolver and 3 new rounds to replace the ones I'd fired. Yeah. And I was straight back to work. And it's exactly the same thing happened after my second incident as well.
Well, I suppose that's the first time you've seen like the politics of like...
Nobody had a policy. The one thing we all thought was the unit had been given its operational role in 1975, so a decade has elapsed. No one has fired a shot in anger. The only shots that have been fired operationally was to destroy a couple of bulls that escaped an abattoir. And the old and bold on the teams were very, very proud of the fact that they never had to fire a shot. Yeah. They're quite arrogant about it. It was like, yeah, that's because our tactics are so good. Yeah. You know, we play the long game, we work with the negotiators, we do this, we do that. And so, I think a lot of people thought, I was almost like the sort of bad boy because I'd fucked up their white reputation.
Where does it sit when you're like, we're doing this for preservation of life, for your own life as well? Like you must have thought, if a guy's got a knife and he's coming at you, then surely you'd be allowed to take the shot then.
Well, you would, but I mean, in this particular circumstances, the threat was to the little girl. The little girl was, in fact, I don't know To this day, I don't know.
I mean, how would that play out now in the way it is now?
He stabbed a little girl, and I don't know to this day whether he stabbed the little girl immediately before I fired the shot, as I fired my shots, or immediately afterwards, because it all just happened so quickly. I just remember seeing a little glint of the knife, and you know.
Do you think the outcome would be the same for you?
So it's an interesting thing. My last shooting, I fired 8 rounds of 5.56 into a guy called Zell Rodney, who I believed was in possession of a submachine gun and was about to open fire. And I faced a trial 10 years later at the Old Bailey. Whiskey 80, the guy who only yesterday was told that, you know, his case was dismissed and he wasn't going to be, you know, done for discipline. He shot the suspect that he shot, again, who hadn't shot first, 10 years ago. If, as in the case of Lee Rigby, the ARVs turn up and there's already been a death, or as in the case of the officers in Manchester, where he'd already killed someone out in the street, or any of the other incidents where, you know, all the terrorist attacks in London that we've had, London Bridge twice, Westminster Bridge, if you shoot someone who is already killed, then you are seen as the white knight that's turned up on the white horse and rescued the maiden and saved the situation. The primary object of an efficient police force, according to Sir Robert Peel, who formed the police force, was the prevention of crime. But if you actually prevent somebody from killing someone by shooting them before they can do it, you are not the solution to the problem. You are now the problem. You have created the problem. And so pretty much anybody that gets involved in a situation where they've shot preemptively and there's been no one injured, you can pretty well guarantee that you're gonna go through the ringer. But in the same way with Manchester, although, you know, it looks like members of the congregation were struck, well, you know, it's been confirmed that they were struck by a police bullet or bullets. The fact is, someone had already been murdered. They were acting in good faith. Had he had a suicide vest, we could have been talking like multiple people killed. And so I've no doubt, and it's already been said pretty much, the IOPC have said that the officers that fired the shots, or the officer that fired a shot, will be looked upon as witnesses rather than suspects. But there is that definite, you know, definition there going on. It's a line. If you cross that line and shoot too soon and save lives, then you are probably going to, you know, it's almost as if the you know, the powers that be want a little bit of blood spilt to justify your use of lethal force.
I'm just at that the other case you're talking about. One of your famous ones where you did put eight rounds. Was it? Well, you know, how did that whole situation play out?
Why did it take 10 years?
Sorry?
Why did it take 10 years?
So...
Can we go back to the actual incident?
Do you want to go back to the 87 incident? My second incident was... So there'd been no shooting. So I'd been the first person to open fire in 1985. About 18 months elapsed. We've had lots of other... we're getting used more and more operationally, but we'd never had to fire another shot. And then we get deployed with the regional crime squad, which no longer exists, but they dealt with serious, you know, armed criminality, you know, drug importation, robberies, all that sort of stuff. We went out on information from them that there was going to be a robbery of a wages delivery at a meat packing factory. And so we basically lay in ambush and a reactive OP, for want of a better word. It was a semi-rural area by London standards, and like two sides of this meat packing factory was surrounded by woodland, and then at the back it opened up into open countryside, and so they had a perfect place to do a robbery, you know, away from the public, away from prying eyes. So we parked up in an unmarked van. We had CROP units, which stands for Covert Rural OPs, which are detectives, surveillance guys that were trained to look like a bush, and they were dug into the, or dug in. They were hiding in the woods, and eventually the robbery took place. But the CROP officers weren't able to trigger the assault because they didn't see it, and I knew they wouldn't see it. It was, action beats reaction. I said at the briefing, I don't think this plan's going to work. They're going to cover the area from the woods across the concrete hard standing and be on top of the security guards before even if someone sees it, by the time it's come up over the net, if they're able to get on the net without, interruption, by the time we react, it's going to be too late. They're going to be on top of them. So everyone else in the team was armed with shotguns, loaded with 00 buck, which is like 9 balls of about 30 caliber, all come out in a 1-er. There's a spread from a shotgun, depending on what distance you try to shoot somebody. If there's a hostage in the close vicinity, there's a good likely you're going to hit the hostage. But we didn't have the use of MP5s at the time, and so that was our primary weapon. And I said, I don't think it's the appropriate weapon for the task. And my team leader, who was a bit fucked off with me, went, right, well, I'll tell you what, Tone, you can have a pistol, and you can carry that new ballistic shield that we've not even trained with. And when the roller shutters go up and we confront them on the concrete hard standing, which is where they will be, you can provide static cover for us as we deploy with the shotguns. Yes. So anyway, long story short, we're looking through little 6mm holes that we've drilled in the roller shutters on the back of this van. And I was the only one that spotted the bad guys. And all I saw was just literally a flash of movement. And with the benefit of hindsight, I think I probably missed the first 2 robbers, and I just caught the last bloke. So I went, go. And because the other guys looking through the holes, they hadn't seen anything. They looked at me as if to say, what the fuck are you talking about? So just fucking go. So they put the roller shutters up, and it was just like, there was a dong in the distance and a bit of tumbleweed blowing across the concrete. And I just glimpsed to my right as I went out. And the team leader and the other guy were just looking at me as if to say, what the fuck have you done? And I was like, on me. And I jumped out with this ballistic shield, which nearly dragged me to the ground. And I went round the corner and I was just confronted by a robbery in progress, 3 heavily armed guys. And of course, I'm going to turn around, look behind me and, so I just basically ended up shooting all 3. And 2 of them died at the scene. And the other one was hit in the back, in the round lodged against his spine. And he went down but survived. And so that was that. And so now I was not only the first person to get involved in shooting, I was also the second person to get involved in the shooting, but now I'm the first person to be involved in a fatal shooting, but it's a double fatal shooting. And so, at that point, I think...
Are you the only one who got rounds down on that incident?
Yeah. It happened so quickly. By the time I came around the corner, I was literally confronted by it. And it was, people started shouting, "Armed police." I can't remember shouting "Armed police," but the team leader had what we called basically it was like a loud hailer clipped on his belt. And we're shouting "Armed police." And it was like, they all had their backs to me. Well, one bloke was facing me, but 2 blokes had their backs to me. And as soon as we started shouting "Armed police," everything started moving. The 2 guys start to turn towards me. And I'm not going to go, well, he might not shoot and he might, you know what I mean? You just shoot, and that was it.
I'm sure your boss was like, fucking Tony again.
No, absolutely, absolutely. But of course, nobody said that, but that's what they were thinking. And, months and months later, after I eventually chose to come off of ops myself, when I eventually asked to go back on ops, it's a long story, buy the book, but I approached my unit commander, who was newly in post, and I said, look, I've got the all clear from psychiatrist, I've done this, I've ticked all the boxes, I want to go back on ops. And he went, well, you've got to realise, Tony, he goes, you're a political embarrassment to the Metropolitan Police. There's no way you're going to carry a gun again.
Because I've done my job well.
Well, yeah. So that kind of fired me up. And, I don't know what it is. I put part of it down to my education. I went to school with posh twats, and I've never really been intimidated by them. And if I think I'm right, I'm quite happy to voice my opinion, like at the briefing, saying, well, I don't think that's going to work, And if you do that, you're going to piss people off. But equally, when I was being marginalised and basically told you'll never do that again, that just basically fired me up to write reports and fucking, demand, and eventually, long story short, I got back on ops. But I had about 2 years really in the doldrums where it seemed like everything I touched turned to shit.
You're also the most experienced shooter now. Like, as in, like, why get rid of that?
Or capability.
Experience.
Yeah, and the thing is as well, after my second incident, it kind of opened the floodgates a little bit, because whether they like to admit it or not, us taking out 3 armed robbers on a robbery plot had a massive effect on armed robbery. There was a huge armed robbery problem. It's like literally, it was Thursdays was robbery day, because that's when all the wages delivered. Because you remember, this was before everybody had bank cards and things, so everybody got a brown envelope with their money in it. So cash in transit was a huge target for criminals, and they'd had it their own way for years. The flying squad were detectives, and they carried like 2-inch revolvers, but they weren't shooters. They were detectives first and foremost, who happened to carry a gun. As soon as they started using us, we started shooting people. And so within a matter of months after my shooting, and so my shooting was in July, in September there was a similar job that the lads were out on. The robbers shot at us first and hit one of our guys in the leg, and he went down. He returned fire, but then like 7 blokes all opened up on this boat. It was a proper 2-way range. Killed 1 suspect, wounded a 3rd. And then after that, it was just like open season, and we got involved in like numerous situations where, because we were now getting shoved in at the sharp end, we weren't responding to like a domestic siege and waiting, because we were up front and because we were shooters, we were far probably more likely to make, a decision to fire than a detective who was just a part-time shot. And it killed armed robbery dead. Yeah, it just stopped it. They all started going, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to buy a load of holiday homes in the Costa del Sol, or I'm going to get into drug dealing. I'm not going to go out on the plot, because I'm quite happy to stick a shotgun, at the knees of an unarmed security guard or in the face of a bank clerk. I'm not too happy when the rounds are coming back at me. So, it did have a massive effect. And of course, once other people started getting involved in it, they took the spotlight away from me as an individual a little bit. And so, after that, I opened fire quite a few times operationally, but never at human targets. During the 90s, we started doing a lot of crack houses and crack dens, and they were using like fighting dogs and things like that. And I had to dispatch a few fighting dogs. But other than that, until 100 days before retirement, when I went out and ended up shooting Azelle Rodney, I'd been it for a while. I kind of reinvented myself a little bit, I think, because a lot of the older senior officers that didn't like the fact that I'd fucked up their perfect record had retired or moved on to other stuff by this point. And I'd like to think if you spoke to any of my colleagues of that era, they'd say that I probably did as much as anyone else to like progress the department, to improve training, to get better facilities, all this sort of stuff. So I kind of was seen upon as an asset rather than as not being an asset.
So mate, you're 100 days out from retirement, ready to move off to Spain or chill out?
No, so I'd been down at I had very close association with the Special Boat Service, and that went back. I talked to you about the ex-B Squadron bloke that couldn't get a barn door. Back in about it was after my second shooting. Was it after my? No, it was after my second shooting, and I was looking at a replacement for the Browning High Power, and Hereford were looking at the SIG 226, and we were looking at the 226, we were looking at the Beretta, we were looking at various pistols, we were also looking at the Glock. And my boss called me up to his office and he said, I went to a conference the other day, or a trade show or something, and I bumped into some blokes from Special Boat Service, and they're looking at changing pistols, but they're concerned they're going to get forced down the route, because Hereford are taking the lead on it, and they're don't particularly like the SIG. And I told them, you're looking at the Glock, so go and see the duty sergeant and get yourself struck off next Wednesday to host these guys from Poole. So about 5 guys come up from Poole, a young captain and a colour sergeant and some guys from what used to be called Black Troop, who were like non-badged guys seconded to M Squadron to do the heli assault side of it. And I took them down a range, and it turned into a coaching session, because I remember the colour sergeant fired this burst of rounds from about 25 yards, And when we went forward, there was like one hole in the knee. And I went, should we go a little bit further forward? You know, and we ended up with a coaching session. And the next week, my boss calls me back up to the office. He said, I'm going to put this on your file. And it was a letter from the COS SBS thanking Constable Long for coaching. And so that was kind of a long established, what became a long established connection for me personally with Paul and also with the unit. So by that point, we'd had about 5 or 6 years of going up to Hereford regularly. And Hereford always, however good we did at something, they give us something to do and we do it. And however well we do, they go, oh yeah, of course that weren't bad lads. But of course our lads would do it with a fridge on their back after they tabbed 20 miles or something. Whereas I just found the SBS blokes were like, one of them actually said, he said, well, we've come to you because you're the experts because we're shit at pistol shooting. And I nearly fell over because no one from Special Forces had ever fucking told me I was any. And I think it was just the boot neck thing as well. It was just like, don't take yourself too seriously sort of thing. So I was down at someone's top table and I had about 6 months to go for retirement. And I don't know what rank he was. I think he was a colour sergeant, but he'd left and he was working for the security services. I didn't realise that at the time. And he said, well, you must be coming up for retirement, aren't you? And I said, yeah. He said, well, he said, I'm putting together a group that will be basically doing sort of stuff abroad, protection type stuff. He's very vague about it. He said, would you be interested? He said, because at the moment, he said, I've got a group of guys, mainly ex-SF guys, but I want it a broader spectrum of guys, and you're the first police officer I've approached. And I said, yeah, absolutely, show me down for that. So I was all lined up to go and do a selection process and a course in the United States. And I was due to retire on the 11th of August, 2005. Like you said, 100 days before I was due to retire, I got involved in the shooting. So I wasn't thinking of retiring to Spain. I didn't have the money to do that. But I was thoroughly looking forward to this. Like, I'd had a really, fantastic career within it, with all the ups and downs. And, we've mentioned some of the downs, but for the most part, it was a fantastic career. I was very proud of my career. And to me, it was like, well, fucking hell, how cool was that? Retire from a really good job in the Met and then get recruited to go and do some job, doing secret shit abroad. I thought, this is fucking brilliant.
You're still fairly young at this point as well, aren't you?
Sorry?
You're still fairly young at this point.
Yeah, I'm 48, so anyway, then the shooting happened and then I went under investigation. And the organisation at the time, the independent organisation, was called the IPCC, the Independent Police Complaints Commission. And they had just been born again out of the remnants of whatever went before, which I think was the Police PCA, the Police Complaints Authority, or something of that nature. And that had failed. It just hadn't done what it said on the packet. And they decided that they needed more experienced investigators. So they recruited middle-aged men, like myself, who had like a career as detectives or as investigators for Customs and Excise or the Post Office or whatever, who had some life experience and, were experienced investigators. And there was also, it also said that, if they were satisfied within 48 days that their inquiries hadn't indicated in any way, shape or form that the officer had acted unlawfully, they would pass that information on to the chief constable of the force in question, and then it would be up to the chief constable, if they wanted to reinstate the officer. So like 48 days on. That's cool. I can put up with that. So out of the blue, I get approached by the same ex-SBS guy who goes, right, he said, I've got a date for you for your course. Oh, brilliant. So I went with an ex-bootneck who'd left the Corps and gone to work for MI5, who'd then been approached as I had to go and do this new job. So the two of us went out together and spent, I think it was about 8 weeks out in the United States doing this course run by a sort of sister agency out there. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. And it was a weird thing because there was just me and this other Brit and about 20 Yanks. And it was people would have paid good money to do it. We were doing evasive driving with night vision goggles on and CQB, and it was everything I loved doing, and I was getting paid to do it. Absolutely brilliant. So we did that, passed it. We both passed comfortably, came back, and then they said, right, okay, we're going to start your vetting process. But then they said to me, we'll start your vetting process, but because of you're still under investigation, we can't grant you your positive vetting until such time as you've been given the all clear. Okay. So I think we got back in the country in around about September time, something like that. And by mid-November, I'd got the all clear from this investigation team. It took longer than 48 days, but I was like, got the all clear. And it said something like, police constable, we're satisfied that, can't remember what, Echo 7. So we're satisfied that Echo 7 acted in accordance with his training, and he fired no more rounds than were necessary in the circumstances, and gave me basically.
Can you talk about that incident and is that like exactly what happened in that?
Okay, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. Yeah, so basically, it was an intelligence-led operation over 2 days. First day, so we went out in what we call a MAST configuration, which stands for Mobile Armed Support Tactics. Probably haven't got that quite right, but it's pretty well what it means. Basically, what it means is we're not surveillance dudes. We've got high performance unmarked vehicles, but we'll go out 3 to a vehicle, so a driver, front scene operator, map reader, and a rear guy. The rear guy's normally got a breaching shotgun because his job will be to blow the tyres out when we get the job to do the hard stop. The lead car is Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. So we normally go out in 3 cars, and that's what we went out on the first day. And the surveillance team are following the suspects, and the intelligence is that these predominantly black organised crime group made up predominantly of West Africans, but with a splattering of white guys and some South American guys and whatever. We're given a target list of about 20 photographs because the organised crime, these are all the people they know in the organised crime group, and it was like perm any 3 out of those 20. We don't know who's going to do the robbery. We think this bloke is definitely going to be involved, but as far as the rest of it, could be any of them. So we go out and we're what we call state green. We use basically a traffic light system. So state green means the surveillance team are wrapped around the bad guys. They're working their magic, and we just stay far enough back out of it. So we're in comms, but so that we're not going to compromise the job. Yeah. And in those days, we were on Cougar radios, which you might be familiar with because it was a military net encrypted system, but the range on it wasn't brilliant, particularly like in London or built up areas. So we had to stay in the vehicles within about sort of half a mile of them, but far enough back. So first day we go out, and the intelligence is that these guys are going to rob some Colombian drug dealers, but they've dealt with these Colombian drug dealers in the past. They've bought cocaine off of them, but this time they're going to rip them off. But because they're known, the inference that we were briefed on at the thing was that they would kill them, because you're not going to rob Colombians who know you, because that would be kind of stupid. So the information was that they were going to tie them up, probably torture them to find out where all the drugs are, go and rob all the drugs, having killed them. That's it. So that was the intelligence. But State Green, we're following, and nothing really happened. We parked up in side streets and we listened to the net, but it was a Friday evening, and it would seem that, from the...
So their car's bugged by this point?
Well, I don't know.
Right.
So, but what I do know is that the intelligence we're getting is what's known as RIPA-based. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
So Regulation of Investigative Powers Act, which tells us that there's probably some form of technical surveillance going on. I don't know what sort of technical, whether the vehicle was bugged, I don't know whether their phones were bugged or whatever, but it's some sort of listening device, presumably. And it's good. It's good intelligence, because they say, they're going to move to such and such now, and sure enough, that's where they go. So it's pretty good information. And I'm pretty sure it was during that first day that we were told unofficially that they'd been overheard to say, we've got 2 Big Macs and a little one, or 2 Big Macs and we're waiting for a little one, or something like that. Well, obviously, they talk they don't talk in clear speech. They talk in patois. And you've got somebody who's probably West African or West Indian, or who speaks the dialect in a call centre, listening and passing that information on, if that's the way the intelligence has been gathered. And that two Big Macs had been interpreted as being Mac 10 submachine guns because we had a huge problem with Mac 10s at the time. And that was because a underground armourer had procured a load of deactivated or blank firing Mac 10s, and he'd bought them apparently on the pretext they were going to be used in a James Bond film, but then he'd reactivated them. And they were being used for killings all over the place, all up and down the country. And so there was a real rush on to try and take as many of these off the street as we could. So the moment they said we got two Big Macs, it was like alarm bells. So the first day we went out in a 3-vehicle configuration. We got stood down about midnight, and we went back to the base. We're briefed to come in the following. We had a bit of a debrief, and I'm pretty sure it was then that a decision was made we were going to ask for a 4th vehicle. Because some of the guys that had been out that day on a Friday, although we were the standby team, had booked the weekend because they had things arranged with the family. So we already had a couple of guys from other teams that were going to stand in, but then they decided they wanted a 4th vehicle because there'd also been some talk or some discussion about the fact they might use 2 vehicles. So if we had to split, then we'd have 2 vehicles. Not ideal, but we'd have 2 vehicles per vehicle. So that was the sketch. And then we drove a gunship, what we call a gunship, unmarked vehicle, home. The bloke that lived out in Kent dropped 2 of us off and then picked us up on the way back in. We get briefed again like 0600, and team leaders made a decision that because of the firepower information, he wanted a 5.56 in each of the 4 vehicles. Now, the day before I'd been driving, and my Oppo is a X2 Paralad, called Smudge, funny old thing. He liked driving, I like driving. So he said, well, you drove yesterday, so I'll drive today. So that put me in the front passenger seat. And we had another guy who was ex-bootneck who was on a different team, and he was sitting in the back with a breaching shotgun. But we're on the Bravo car on Monday, and we're on the Bravo car on the Tuesday. And what that means is that when a vehicle interception goes in, the tactic is, or the tactic was, I'm sure it's probably changed by now, was that the lead vehicle, the Alpha car, bearing in mind we're all in unmarked vehicles, the hope is that we manage to remain covert up to the point of interdiction. So when we're given the command state red, means we're imminently about to do the hit. When we get the attack, the Alpha car will do a dodgy overtake, the sort of overtake that if someone did it to you in London, it would piss you off. Yeah. So basically do a naughty one, sneak in front of you and slam on the brakes so that you, the driver of the bandit car, have to slam your brakes on and you're totally focused on the idiot that's pulled in front of you. And what the fuck? That's the thing. And the idea then is that the Bravo car will come alongside and working on the principle of cover and movement, the front seat passenger in the Bravo car is always a static cover. So you're on approach with your window down and your weapon ready so that you're literally now feet away from the car. You're that close that they can't open their doors, offside doors, and you dominate anyone in the vehicle. So that's the plan. And then the Charlie car comes up behind and if necessary stuffs him up the arse so he can't reverse out of it. And with the 4th car, he goes wherever he wants and fills the gaps. And that's basically the tactic, like any form of CQB. It's like find yourself a job, fill the gap, make yourself busy. And it's exactly the same with the vehicle interdiction because it'll never go perfectly, will it? So that was the plan. So I'm now front passenger seat. And I remember on the briefing saying to everyone, because we were all from different teams, right, lads, just be aware, I am going to go static on the Bravo. So I can, just be aware, don't move in front of my guns or whatever, So that was it. Off we go. And intelligence has come in overnight that they are going to make a meet. The bad guys are going to make a meet in a cafe in Fulham. So we want you to make your way straight to Fulham and get to Fulham police station and hold up in the yard there. And the surveillance team are going to be plotting up this cafe where they're going to do the meet. So sure enough, we go to Fulham and we're there for most of the morning, I think. Nothing much is happening. Blokes are getting their head down, reading the Saturday newspapers, chatting, taking the piss, I seem to remember there was a slight water fight at one point or another, fucking just blokes being twats. And we were, because there wasn't much activity, it was like, well, if you want to just let the team leader know, but if you just want to whip down the shops and get a Mars bar or something, fucking do that. So I approached the team leader and said, I just want to go and get some food. So I put my covert earpiece in. You know, we're all wearing our covert body armour. We're all dressed in like scruffy civvies with my pistol. And I literally just go down. I'm just about to go in the shop and it comes over the net that there's some activity. So I forget about the food, go back, and everybody's getting ready and getting in the vehicles and stuff. So I jump in my vehicle, and the next thing you know, they're going to leave the cafe imminently. They're going to get in a vehicle, and they're going to go to another address where they're going to collect a gun. So sure enough, that happens. It's a flat or a house or something in the Fulham area. Sure enough, they go to a flat in the Fulham area. So same thing. Surveillance team are doing their thing. We're still at State Green, and then it comes up on the net. They're now going to, I want to say Kilburn. It wasn't Kilburn, but it's somewhere up North London. I'm a South London boy. I don't know North London very well. So they're going to go to this location, Harlesden. Now Harlesden is, I wouldn't say it's predominantly black, but there's a large black community there. A predominantly white surveillance team it's not going to struggle because they do it all the time, but it's not easy to mount like close surveillance in that sort of area. So sure enough, the vehicle goes to Harlesden and it parks outside an Alpha that is known to the intelligence cell. It's frequented by this organised crime group. It's like a social club, like a sort of predominantly black social club. And so they pull up. There's loads of like meeting on the pavement, lots of back, hand slapping and banter on the pavement. And it's all being watched. What we didn't know was that there was a covert airborne asset up watching. Some of us guessed that it might be because the quality of the intelligence seemed to be pretty good. And at one point, the three subjects moved off into a side street adjacent to this premises, where they were seen to meet with a fourth person who handed over what appeared to be a heavy bag to them. They then take that heavy bag back and they put it in the back of the VW Golf that they're driving in. The rear seat passenger is then seen to put on a 3/4 length coat. Now, it's the last day of April. Yeah, last day of April. And it's like a warm spring day. So that was like a combat indicator in itself. So we now think that they've taken delivery of the two Mac 10s or whatever, that they're in the back of the vehicle. And the next thing we hear is they're good to go. They're going to go and do the job. So off they go. We're still State Green. And very shortly afterwards, it's heading now towards Edgware, because all we know about the Colombians is that they live in a flat in Edgware, not far from Edgware railway station, but we don't know the actual location. So it starts to make its way, and I don't know North London very well, but it starts to make its way, and it's not on main roads. And so consequently, it's not possible for us to make any progress, because shortly after it starts to go, what we call the Silver Commander, who's like the most senior detective, who's in our control ship with our team leader at the back of the caravan, if you like, he gives us State Amber. Well, State Amber means that we're going from State Green, where the surveillance team have primary role. They're going to be looking in their rearview mirrors now, and when they see us coming up, they're going to one by one peel off to one side and let us slowly make our way to the front of the convoy. But we couldn't really make much progress because of the nature of the roads. Yeah. And it wasn't until we hit the A1 that we're on dual carriageway and we start to make a bit more progress. And it was only at that point I knew where I was, because I looked to my left and I saw the tower blocks from Hendon Police Training College. So I went, all right, I kind of roughly know where I am now. So we're on the A1, and then the next thing you know, it's left into Mill Hill Broadway, which is a busy high street, basically. And we're in Mill Hill Broadway, and we have now got all our ducks in a row. We've taken over from the surveillance team, and we have declared eyeball. So the lead vehicle, Alpha, now has eyeball, which means we've got control over the surveillance speak. So the front seat passenger of Alpha starts giving a commentary, and it's at the mini roundabout underneath the A1. It's in a right into Hale Lane, or third exit, Hale Lane. Hale Lane is a fairly fast bit of road, but it's a B road. Well, it might be an A road, I don't know, but it's quite windy, but it's fairly broad, not too many parked vehicles on either side. And pretty well everyone in the convoy has now got view of the vehicle. And if you want to watch this, it's all on YouTube, because unbeknownst to me, a guy in the Delta car is videoing it. And he's a good mate of mine, not as good a mate as he used to be. No, we are still good mates, but I never have to pay for a drink anymore. But he had not long come back. So each team is made up of about roughly 12 guys, and probably a good 50% of most of those teams will be instructors. So every so often they'll rotate out the team into our training role. But he'd just come back from training, and he had taken a primary lead on masked training. And he'd convinced the bosses back at our operational base when he came back on the teams that we haven't got a lot of recent footage of vehicle stops, and we could do with some more up-to-date footage. So they'd gone, yeah, okay, fine. But he was strapping with our team, and he hadn't told our team leader. So he's filming from the Delta car, and you'll see the whole thing on the Delta car, and you'll see, even from the Delta car, which is the last vehicle in the convoy except for the control ship, you can see the subject vehicle, because as the road curves, you'll see all of us in a row, and you can hear the guy, I think it's the driver of the Delta car, go, yeah, the guy on the back seat is looking round. And I could see him looking round as well. And I wasn't convinced at this stage that we weren't burnt. Because now, instead of having a surveillance team with chicks and vans, and, single crewed vehicles and motorbikes, now you've got a group of like high performance saloon cars with three white blokes in each car. Do you know what I mean? So you hear on the net that the Alpha car says something to the words effects of, we're going to see if we can do him at the roundabout if he stops. And then almost immediately he goes attack, 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 which is nationally it's strike, 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 but attack, attack, attack is a bit of a throwback to the flying squad. It's terminology they used to use. It's frowned upon, but kind of stuck, So the Alpha car does its overtake. And the moment the Alpha car does its overtake, I'm in the Bravo car. I've now clearly got a clear and unobstructed view of the bandit vehicle. And I'm not happy with the bloke in the back of that car at all. What I don't realise is that as the Alpha car goes out, it puts its foot down because there's a car coming straight towards it on the other side of the road. And basically, as soon as it pulls in, it leaves us head-on collision possible with this oncoming vehicle. I don't realise any of this until 5 years later when I eventually see the video. But so my driver, Smudge, he swerves in, and in swerving in, he clips the rear of the bandit car, which means that the driver of the bandit car goes, what the fuck? And slams his brakes on instinctively. So the Alpha car has now overshot the bandit car, and we're behind the bandit car, and the Charlie car's behind the bandit car, and the Delta car's behind the bandit car. And I don't remember any of this. It's only, like I said, 5 years later when I eventually see this video footage, I'm allowed to see this video footage, that I realise it. But the way in my mind, it was just a vehicle stop. And my recollection is that I saw the subject apparently leaning forward with his hands on the back of the front seats, with his head between the passenger and looking at the driver and the passenger. Now, obviously, I can't see the front of his face. I can't see but my impression is that he's having a heated discussion with a crew. And my thinking is it's all on top, the old bill around, what we're going to do sort of thing. So I then see him pushing himself back in his seat, and he looks over his left shoulder and he looks over his right shoulder, and then he ducks down and he's out of my sight, by which time I'm alongside him. So I've seen him duck down. Now, the way I described it in my statement, because that was my recollection, was that the way I describe it is it's almost described as if I've seen it all through the rear offside window. But looking back with the benefit of hindsight, I probably saw a lot of it on the final approaches through the back window. And do you know what I mean? Nothing's static, but that's the way I recalled it. So that's what I wrote in my statement. Anyway, the next thing I know, the subject is out of my vision and he's sprung back up again. But his hands are below the level of the window. And I can't see his hands.
Have you moved alongside at this point?
By this time, I'm right alongside him. My window's down. I've whipped the ballistic helmet off the floor and shoved that on my head, because we'd experimented back at the base with putting a ballistic, because we think he's got a Mac 10. We tried putting a ballistic shield down, but I think it just didn't fucking work. Yeah. So I'm now covering with a G36, and suddenly he springs back up again. And my thinking is he's gone for a gun. You know, I don't know whether the gun's ended up on the floor because he's been rammed from the back, or whether the gun was always on the floor or whatever, but his shoulders are hunched and all his body language tells me he's got a gun and that he's about to fire it. And I think I might never get the benefit of seeing that gun. He might, if it's a Mac 10, he might just shoot from the hip, you know. So I think to myself, right, everything slows down, and you know, I remember one half of my brain having an argument with the other half of my brain, and eventually it's like one half won the argument and went, fucking, you got to engage. So I started engaging. And thinking back on it, you know, when I'd finished shooting, my first rounds that struck the glass frosted everything over. Yeah. And then bits of the glass fell out. So eventually I'm shooting at, and there's pictures at the scene of this window that's completely frosted out except for an area about that big. So I'm basically like shooting through a hole in the ice. Do you know what I mean? But as far as I'm concerned, he's upright, and I keep shooting until he's no longer upright. Yeah. And as soon as he drops out of view, I cease fire, by which time my driver's was still in the car for the last two shots. Now, I'm firing a G36. My spent fucking cylinders are coming out, hitting the windscreen and landing in front of him on the dashboard. He didn't know I'd fired a single shot. Yeah. He had no idea I'd fired. I fired 8 rounds. He was in the vehicle with me for 6 of them. Now, if we fired a 5.56 in this room now, our ears would all be fucking ringing. Yeah. He didn't have a fucking clue. Yeah. My rear seat passenger, he's debussing with a shotgun to shoot the tyres out, when he suddenly sees the rear window, or the rear window of the thing shatter, and hears multiple rounds and thinks he is under fire. Yeah. And someone from the Charlie car said they saw him literally fucking pat himself down and go, "I'm all right," and then crack on with the tyres. He didn't realise I'd fired either. He thought that my gunshots were the gunshots coming from the vehicle, and that the glass coming out was coming from shots from inside the vehicle.
What's the driver and the passenger doing in that car at that time?
I have no idea, because all my attention's focused entirely on the thing. Yeah. But the crew of the Alpha car are deploying as well. So the rear seat passenger in the Delta car hears gunshots as he's deploying. Yeah. Sorry, the Alpha car hears gunshots, thinks it's two-way, or at least, you know, we're coming under fire. But his job is to take out the front tyres. So he immediately just goes on task and starts taking down the tyre. He shoots the tyres on one side of the vehicle, and then does a Starsky and Hutch and slides across the bonnet and does the tyres on the other side of the vehicle. The driver of the Alpha car has obviously got out on the offside, brought his weapon up. I think he's just armed with a pistol at this point, and he's approaching the vehicle. Out of the 14 of us on the scene, he was the only one that knew I'd fired, because he can see, as he's approaching the car direct, he can see my muzzle outside the vehicle, and he can see my muzzle blast. He focuses all his attention on the driver of the Bandit car. The front seat passenger of the Alpha car gets out, comes up into the aim, starts to advance on the vehicle, his responsibility being the front seat passenger, but both the front seat passenger and the driver have just gone like that, and they've got their hands up against the window and they're surrendering. So to him, they're no longer a threat, at that stage. But he sees the rear seat passenger, before I open fire, duck down and thinks, I'm not happy with him. But instead of sticking in his LOE, in his limit of exploitation, instead of just dominating the front bloke, he decides to go down the vehicle and try and get a view into the rear vehicle. At that point, either one of my rounds or a bit of debris comes out the near side of the vehicle at the back, and he thinks he's under fire. So he never sees the guy pop back up again, because his angles are changed. Before, he was looking through the windscreen between the driver and the front seat passenger. As soon as he starts to walk downside the vehicle, he's got the reflection off the car. He can't see the bloke in the back. The next thing you know, I said that the window shatters, and he thinks, fuck, I'm under fire. So he holds his position. So I fired my 8th round. The Delta car is pulled along parallel with us, offside of us. So I've debussed away from the enemy So I've clambered across the seat and out the driver's door. I've gone down between the Delta car and my car, and I've come round to the back of the car, and I'm trying to get vision into the car, but I can't see anything. So I drive the muzzle of my G36 through the rear windscreen, which immediately shatters. And I look into the vehicle, and in my statement I described it as I couldn't see anything because the inside of the vehicle was dark. Now that later got thrown back at me several years later at court, and they went, well, it wasn't dark, was it? And I went, well, that was my perception. Oh, it's your perception again, is it? Oh, right, just like it was your perception that this happened and that happened, you know. And it wasn't until quite some time afterwards, after the job that, or after I've been cross-examined, I can't remember exactly the sequence of events now, but we were on another job and we were at Lambeth, which is a support headquarters and the forensic science lab is there. And we were stood to on a job, and someone comes along and taps on my window in the car, and he goes, "Fucking hell, have a look at this, Tone." I went, "What?" He goes, "You're never going to guess what we found." So he takes me over to a railway arch, because the railway arches run like through the facility, and in a railway arch and covered by a canvas is the VW. So I'm still serving. This is a few years afterwards, and then I looked in the rear. Obviously, the rear window's gone, and I realised why it was dark. And why I couldn't see anything. And I never would have been able to see anything. Because if you look in the back of a 2003 VW Golf, the rear parcel shelf is made out of that sort of carpet type material. Yeah. And it's almost like cardboard, isn't it? But and it's really quite deep. It's quite a big boot. So the only way that I would have seen anything in the back of that vehicle in terms of Zell Rodney was if I'd have actually clambered in the back. But because it was matte black, and I'm just looking in, my brain went, it's dark, can't see anything. So not being able to see in the back of the vehicle, I come round to the other side of the vehicle, my G36 is up, and the front seat passenger of the Delta car is like, we've now met at our LOE. And he looks at me as if to say, "Was that you that shot?" And I went, "Yeah." And he went, "Right, okay." So I covered, or did he cover? Yeah, I covered. And he reached across, opened the door, I come round, and Zell Rodney is lying across the back seat with his head towards me. So he's fallen not towards me, but towards where I'd been sitting. Yeah. So my mate reaches in while I'm covering, grabs him by the shoulder, the scruff of the shoulder here, pulls him into a sitting position, at which point his head sort of lolls towards us. Yeah. And he looks like he's been attacked by a meat cleaver. He's got I can see grey matter and blood, and brain matter and blood come out and spill down my mate's trouser leg. Yeah. And he looks at me and goes like, "Okay, you don't need to be here, mate. Fuck off." So, and this was my experience. It was my experience in both of my previous shootings. I don't know whether it's an overwhelming feel of guilt but in all the instances where I'd opened fire and I knew, or I thought, or I knew I'd killed people, my first instinct was make yourself busy. Yeah. Just do something, anything, you know. So at the abattoir shooting, I ended up giving first aid to the wounded guy. At my first shooting, I went back to the flat we were using as a control and started making bacon sandwiches and coffees for the lads, you know. So I thought, right, okay, go back to the car. So I went back to my car. And as I go back, Smudge, my driver, is sitting on the bonnet or standing on the bonnet of the Bandit car, covering the driver. But they can't get to the driver because our car is blocking the driver's door. Yeah. So he looks at me and says, "Fucking move the car back, move the car back." So I checked the safety on my G36. I chucked it across onto the front passenger seat. I get in, and that's when I spot the empty cases on the dashboard, and I drive it back about 3 or 4 foot, enough for him to open the car door. And I get out, by which time Smudge has dropped down and he's opening the door. And I shouted to him, and he looks at me as if to say, "Look, what? You know, I'm busy. Can you see I'm busy?" And I went, "Mate, my G36 is on the front seat, safety catch applied, ran in a breach." And he looks at me as if to say, "Well, what the fuck are you telling me for?" You know. So I think, right, nothing for me to do now. So I start to walk back towards the back of the chain, and my team leader's standing there. And my team leader is a sergeant. He will have been in the control ship with the Silver Commander. There's a fucking scene of chaos. He doesn't know who's fired the fucking shots. Azelle Rodney has been now taken out of the vehicle. He's on the ground. There's blokes got the med kit from the Alpha car. They're starting to work on him, not because there was any realistic expectation that we could save him, but because we can't declare someone dead. You can't just stand there and go, well, he's Browners. You've got to actually try and do something. So my TL sort of sees me and goes, like, first look as if to say, why aren't you doing something? And then he sort of registered. He said, was it you that shot? And I went, yeah. He goes, what did you see? I said, well, I didn't see a gun. And he looked at me with despair as if to say, what the fuck? And I said, there's a gun in the car, 100%. I said, but I just couldn't see it. So he goes, well, best you go and sit in the control ship. So I went to the back of the convoy, and the control ship was parked about 40 metres behind the rest of us. And as I walked back, there was a pub on the right, which turned out to be like a Hells Angels pub. And I'm dressed as a builder. That was my day. That's how I used to dress. I had paint splattered, old pair of combats on, an old pair of boots, loose shirt so my body armour didn't show, and I had a bum bag with a pistol in. And as I'm walking back, there's a detective with a yellow hat, and he recognises me, but he's got his hands across the door and he's stopping everyone come out. And he looks at me and sort of winks, and I looked back at him, and then the bloke at the door says, what the fuck's going on, mate? What's going on? And I said, I don't know. So I think the old Biller shot someone. And there was a big fucking cheer. I can hear you. So I went and sat in the control ship, and then about 2 or 3 minutes later, my team leader comes back with a Silver Commander and says, right, just tell us what happened. So I tell both the Silver Commander and my team leader everything that I saw. And the Silver Commander goes, well done, Tone. I'm sure you did the right thing. Fucking don't worry about it. He said, we don't know what's in the vehicle. He said, it's not our crime scene anymore. He said, we're going to have to wait for other people to do it, because we, now that someone's been shot, we have to hold our investigation.
Yeah.
But the guy that was doing the videoing, he's gone up to my team leader in the meantime and said, look, you need to know I videoed that. I've got the whole hit on video. So my team leader said, what the fuck were you doing videoing it? And so he explains, and he goes, right, well, twat, right, you make yourself busy and video everything that's going on then. So my mate with the video camera has videoed the first aid, and he's done everything else. And he videos in the back of the car, and the pistol, you can see the butt of the pistol, the barrel of the pistol, whatever, I don't know, I've only seen photographs, underneath a carrier bag, an orange carrier bag, which looks like it slid off the rear parcel shelf as the hit's gone in, and it's ended up on top of this thing. So there's a pistol on the back seat. So within a very short space of time, they sent the driver of the Alpha car to come and sit with me to keep me company. And 2 of the lads have come back and said, mate, there's a fucking pistol on the back seat. And I said, what sort of pistol is it? Because I'm looking for a Mac 10. And they go, it's not a Mac 10. It looks like a 1911. And that's what it was. It was a deactivated Colt 1911. It wasn't loaded, but there was live 45 ACP ammunition in the bag, apparently. So they obviously thought that it worked. These weren't professional shooters. So that was it. So once I knew there was a gun, I just remember like fucking putting my head back banging my head against the headrest and like punching the seat and just going, fuck for that. I knew I was right. And then I fell asleep. I literally fell asleep before we left the scene. And I woke up as we're going through the back gates of our headquarters.
What's a stressful position to be in, like assuming that someone's got a weapon and you've got split seconds to make that choice to, am I firing or I'm going to get fired upon here?
Yeah.
And they've got weapons in the vehicle, you've had that intelligence. To then be having to be stressed about, did I see a weapon, didn't I? You're always going to question it.
So I've already mentioned some of the discrepancies. So like I said, the only person that's seen, I knew that it was me that had fired, was the driver of the Alpha vehicle. The front seat passenger had seen the subject duck down across the back seat, but hadn't seen him come back again, as I described. So we're part way there. We've both seen him duck down, but he hasn't seen him come up again. There's a member of the public who's standing out, who's got previous he's a heroin addict, and he's got previous for theft, shoplifting and stuff, a minor petty thief. He witnesses the whole thing. In his statement, he describes, he thought it was road rage. He sees a car overtake. He sees the bloke in the back leaning on the front seats, arguing with the two blokes in the front seat. He then sees him push himself backwards and look like that. He said, and then fucking the windows all shattered and he slumped and his head fell out the window. I mean, he saw brain matter and blood run down the window. Well, that's obviously wrong. Yeah. But everything he said at the beginning was exactly what I'd seen. No opportunity for me to speak to this bloke. And it wasn't until I read the statements 5 years later that I realised that he's written what I've written on the night. The only difference was, and I'm perplexed. I'm thinking, as I'm reading this statement years later, I'm thinking, well, how did and someone else described, I think it was the driver, my driver, when he was dealing with the driver of the bandit car, said that he saw somebody sitting up in the back seat with a severe gunshot wound to the head, or what looked like a severe head wound. And I think, well, that couldn't have fucking happened. Yeah. But this is how it works. So when my mate has said to me, you don't need to be here, fuck off, and I've gone back and I've reversed the car and made myself busy, I've left him with Azelle Rodney with a severe gunshot wound, lolling, and basically flopping, and basically he's gone, I need to get the med kit. So he's held him in position and he slammed the rear door and left him propped up against the rear door while he's gone back to the Alpha car to get the med kit. And when he's come back, he's like his head's half hanging out the door and blood and brain. So that's what the witness has seen. Yeah. But he's put it all together, and he says, I've seen him shot, and the window shattered, and his head's popped out. Well,
That's how he remembers it.
Yeah, exactly. The guys that were in the Charlie car said that they heard the gunshots and saw the rear windscreen shatter. Well, no, they didn't. I smashed that probably 20 or 30 seconds after I'd fired my last shot. But again, a teenage girl said that she saw somebody get out of the control ship that was parked 40 metres away, sprint towards the thing and start firing bullets through the rear window. So it actually transpired, and many, many years later, when I stood trial at the Old Bailey, a decade later, my defence was, and this was a defence that my barrister had put together, was why is it that we're expecting a higher level of recollection from my client because he fired the shots to the 16 other people that were at the scene? Because everyone
got
different stories. I mean, all essentially it's the same story, but everybody remembers little bits of it different. So why is it that I'm being held to this level of because I fired the shots? Because what they were saying is, I've no doubt whatsoever that when I sat down, absolutely, that when I wrote down my evidence 10 years prior to the trial, that was my best recollection. Yeah. But clearly, I recalled seeing it all through the side window when clearly I'd seen some of it through the rear window, So, because what they were saying is that all the vehicles had effectively black boxes in them. All police vehicles are fitted with something so that when there's an accident, they can say what speed you were driving at, what gear you were in, whether you were accelerating, whether you were decelerating. And because of that, they were able to geolocate the vehicles and do this computer, and together with the video that had been taken, match it all together and create a computer-generated impression of what happened. And they said that my first shot on the videotape was 0.5 seconds after my vehicle came to rest. So they were trying to make out that I only had 0.5 seconds of decision-making process before I opened fire. When in point of fact, I'd been watching Azelle Rodney and his weird behaviour from the moment the Alpha car did its overtake. So, and that was 10 seconds. Yeah. And 10 seconds is a fucking long time in a situation like that. So so basically what happened is flipping back now to my recruitment for that job, I came back, they started my vetting process almost a year to the day after the shooting. So in April of the following year, which was 2006, I got the all clear from the Crown Prosecution Service to say that there was no case to answer and there would be no criminal proceedings. At which point my chief superintendent wrote a letter to the Foreign Office to say that I'd been cleared and that I was now free to retire and commence my job with the Foreign Office. And then I didn't hear anything. Yeah. And to be honest, I wasn't in a rush to leave, and I was quite comfortable. My feet were on the table. It was only after about a month I thought, you need to change. Why didn't you? Should have heard something by now. So I got in touch with my vetting officer, and my vetting officer said, "Oh, that sounds a bit strange. I'll get back to you." So he rang me up and he said, "Mate, I don't know what this is about." He said, "And I obviously can't talk about it." He said, "But something's a bit strange because they want you to come in for another interview." So I went back to this sort of nondescript building in Vauxhall, not the main building, but some little weird place, and where the vetting was taking place. And they said, I sat down with a senior woman from vetting, and she said, "Yeah, we're a bit concerned because you admitted in your vetting that you had been unfaithful in previous relationships." And, you know, I'd never been vetted to that level before, and I spoke to people prior to vetting, and they went, "Just be honest. They don't care what you've done. What they don't want you doing is lying about it. So just be honest." So I said, "Yeah, I've been unfaithful in a relationship." And they go, "Well, you've got to see our point of view. You know, you can imagine the headlines, sort of James Bond love rats, fucking blah blah blah." I said, "Well, I can't see that happening. I don't. Why would that happen?" So she said, "Well, I'll have to pass this up the chain." And then I got called back for a second meeting, and they said, the head of vetting was there with this woman, and he took a totally different spin on it. He said, "What you got to realise, Tony," he said, you're nearly 50. We're used to recruiting people straight from university and moulding them in our way of doing things. We believe that, you said you'd be unfaithful in relationships. We're going to post you, a lot of trust involved. We're going to post you all over the world. And we're not sure that you wouldn't be become a honey trap, get sucked into a honey trap." And I said, first of all, you're not recruiting everyone from university, because the team you want me to join is made up almost exclusively of ex-servicemen that have done, probably, warrant officers and have probably done 20 odd years in the military. I said, but secondly, how's that recruiting from university working for you? Yeah. So, because I seem to remember, growing up in the 60s, the biggest, spy rings were all university graduates, weren't they? So anyway, I appealed against it. I went and spoke to the guy that had recruited me. He was absolutely furious, I put in an appeal, but they basically said, if you proceed with this, we are going to turn you down on your vetting, and that might impede you going for other government jobs. Yeah. So I just withdrew from it, and I ended up, because I didn't have anything else to go to. I stayed with the Met for another 3 years within the teams, helped set up a dedicated sniper team, which we hadn't had before. And then I got approached by a company called Edgar Brothers. That's gunsmithing, trade things. And I worked for them for a bit, but my past was catching up with me. And eventually because of the intelligence, so basically, because I hadn't seen a gun, I was basing my decision to fire like 50% on his body language and my experience, and 50% on the intelligence. Yeah. Well, when it got sent to the coroner looked at the heavily redacted statements and went, "I can't put this before a jury. All I can tell the jury is that, he knew something that I can't tell you about, and he opened fire." Mm-hmm. And Ripper hadn't considered that might happen. Mm-hmm. So it hadn't allowed the coroner in law to see that intelligence. So they basically had to rewrite the law. And so that took years. And then eventually, about 7 years after the incident, they had a judge-led public inquiry where the judge, a High Court judge, was allowed to see the evidence. And he sat on his own without a jury. And they held this inquiry that went on for months and months and months. But the public inquiry was actually set up 2 years before I gave my evidence. So for 2 years, they'd been doing computer reconstructions. They'd been doing all of this sort of stuff, and just basically, in my mind, playing Miss Marples for 2 years. They'd already decided that I must be lying because my statement didn't compute with their computer-generated this, that and the other, and it conflicted with the other statements. So when I got in the witness box, it was pretty well a done deal. But the bizarrest thing was, on day one of the public inquiry, when they actually started listening to witnesses, the barrister got up in open court and gave all of that intelligence that we were told had to be redacted, gave it to the press. About the MAC-10s, about this, that and the other. Gave the whole lot.
Really?
Yeah. And at the end of it, the judge decided that I'd acted unlawfully. So, of course, it then went back to the Crown Prosecution Service, who, despite the fact that they'd looked at it for 6 months and had had a senior barrister, a Silk, look at it and had decided that there was no case to answer, as soon as a 72-year-old retired High Court judge went, yeah, I think he acted unlawfully, they went, within a matter of weeks I was charged with murder.
Oh,
and a year later it comes up at the Old Bailey. So yeah, so that was the reason. It was all like legal issues.
It just dragged on for 10 years.
10 years, yeah. Because they had to change the law, and then they had to.
How did the press get hold of the title lender? How did they know about your other shootings? The Met Seals.
So when I got involved in my first shooting in 1985, when I shot the guy that had Errol Walker, the guy that had stabbed a little girl and murdered her mum, my name, nothing happened until I gave evidence about 12 months later at the Old Bailey, and then I was named because this was the first shooting we'd ever had. Yeah. No one had even thought that we'd ever probably get involved in a shooting because of the reason I talked about, and no one thought it would be an issue. So my name was given out, and interestingly enough, by pure coincidence, there was a sergeant in the City of London Firearms Unit whose name was also Tony Long, and the press camped out on his elderly mother's doorstep. So then we kind of, that might be a bit of a problem. But they didn't have a photograph of me. And then in 1987, when I got involved in my second shooting, clearly I suspect probably a detective, because detectives had a history of having friendly press contacts, because it was a two-way thing. The press helped them with investigations. Someone has obviously told the press, that geezer, that copper that shot those three robbers, he's the same one that saved the little girl. So the next thing you know, it was headlines reading, gun cop, hero before, and I'm named in the press. And so from that point, really, from, a few days after the abattoir incident, so around about the 9th of July, 1987, from that point on, I've lived with alarms in my house, panic buttons by the bed.
That's like trial by the media, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know for a fact that journalists, because I've had journalists tell me, from 1987 through to me basically being denied anonymity, because by this point we'd had other officers involved in the incident. So as soon as you got involved in a shoot, when my last shooting, and I shot Zell Rodney, as soon as we got back to the base and we started to go into what's known as PIP, the post-incident procedure, I utilised my pseudonym, which was Echo 7, and everyone else on the team was Echo something or other. And so we wrote our statements Echo 7, and they were signed Echo 7. And it was only, and we gave our evidence all the way through the public inquiry by our codes. But when I got charged, the press appealed the decision to allow me to have my anonymity, because they think you should be named, because it's the freedom of the press and the public have a right to know and all this sort of stuff, that my identity was taken away from me, my covert thing was taken away from me. So I then became named, and of course, because I was no longer serving in the police, they couldn't smuggle me into court like they had done in the past. And so I was captured every day walking through the front door of the Old Bailey. My photograph was all over the Old Bailey, which is kind of why I'm talking to you now, and why I wrote the book, and why I've done documentaries, and why when officers like Whiskey 80, who've had a similar 10-year ordeal to me, when, somebody needs to speak up for him. Yesterday in the press, the day before, the commissioner actually stood up and was quite strong in support of armed officers. But historically, the job has been quite weak on it. And, because I was outed, for want of a better word, that's why I kind of, it makes me sound like, I'm a proper, goody two shoes. But I just feel like I kind of owe a debt really to let, because they haven't got a voice. They can't say, look, you just don't understand the reality of, you know, perceptual distortion, you know, unless you've been in a
split second.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you've shared that sort of experience as a serviceman, or you've found yourself in a traumatic situation where you've had to try and accurately recall what you went through, you won't understand. And you'll think it's just people lying, you know.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't have a weapon, it still wouldn't have been the wrong decision.
No, because I had an honestly held belief. Yeah. And that's what the legal profession hate. If they could in some way change the law or the wording of the law, and don't forget, this doesn't just apply to police officers. The act and section that gives you as a member of all of us in this room, or a shopkeeper, or a little old lady with a brolly, or whatever it might be, gives us the power to use reasonable force. Is Section 3 of the Criminal Law Act 1967 and common law. Common law gives you a right to self-defence, but Section 3 of the Criminal Law Act says, and I won't get it exactly right, any person may use such force as is reasonable in the circumstances in the prevention of crime or the arrest or assisting in the arrest of an offender or a suspected offender or of a person unlawfully at large. So that's not power that's given to police, that's given to all of us. It's just that in modern times, we expect police to use force on our behalf. And to justify that use of force, you have to have an honestly held belief that your life or someone else's life is either in danger or they're in danger of serious bodily harm, basically. It also applies to lesser things. So, for instance, if you and I get in a fight, and I have an honestly held belief that you're imminently about to headbutt me, I don't have to wait to be headbutted.
No, exactly. You could see that
exactly. But they would love to get around, because they think that police officers that use force in circumstances like the ones that myself, Whiskey 80 and others found themselves in, they think that we use that as a coverall. It's not our fault that it's quite broad. It's not our fault that that's the way the legislation has been written. Or the way that courts have decided. But ultimately, it's absolutely fair, because you can't expect someone to shoot a bullet at you or murder someone in front of you before you can actually act. It doesn't make sense.
You can't just be reactive.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how did that end after that 10-year point? How was it?
Well, I'm basically on the run from prison because I got found guilty. And
on the run.
No, so obviously I was acquitted. And it was a majority verdict.
Right.
So that there was, I believe, one person on the jury that felt that I'd acted unlawfully, and I know exactly who that was. Because if you spend 4 weeks in a court,
you can work it out.
With it, you work out who the problem is. And there was one guy, and I'll suspect he's probably on the spectrum just by his body language and by the way he answered. So every jury member had to answer a question before they were selected for the jury by the judge, and that question was, do you know or have you ever had any association with anybody who was an armed police officer? And obviously if you said yes, my dad's an armed copper, then you wouldn't go on the jury. And this one guy gets on, he was awfully nervous, and he was, and he was a bit, I think he worked for the government, and he said, do you know? And he goes, no, I don't. He sat in the jury. And then the following day, the judge comes in and he says, before we call the jury in, he said, I've got to, one of the jurors has said that I've got to put the question to him again effectively. So he says to the person, I used to work for the Ministry of Defence, he said, and I used to go in the canteen, he said, and sometimes I'd be in the queue with armed officers from the Ministry of Defence Police. And the judge sort of went, no, you're fine. Yeah. But he was the one, he was just asking stupid questions all the way to the point where all the other jury members, you could see that as soon as he piped up or as soon as he raised the piece of paper, so I've got a question, they'd be like, they'd bury their head in their hands and, oh, for fuck's sake, shut up, And then the jury had been out for a couple of days. It was like the worst couple of days of my life because they'd been sent out last thing, like on, say for argument's sake, a Tuesday afternoon. They come back in the Wednesday. They'd only had half a day because the judge had to do something in the afternoon. And then like the next day, halfway through the day, the judge calls everybody back in and says, he says, one of the ladies on the jury has come up in a nasty rash. So I've sent her to see matron, and depending on what matron says, we may have to call it a day and come back tomorrow or whatever. So anyway, comes back in. Matron says she's got a nasty rash, so I'm sending everyone home early. So by this point, my now wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, who wasn't even with me at the time of the incident, she's been sitting up in the gallery stoically listening to all the evidence and everything else. And because the jury are out making a decision, and that decision could be imminent, the job have paid for me and my wife to stay in a hotel in London so that whether I get found guilty or not guilty, if the press have managed to find out where we live, we don't end up getting doorstepped. So we're staying in a hotel. We've got a security team that, because the Met couldn't provide protection for me. So I ended up with a team of they were called the Expendables. So it was just a load of my old colleagues. And funny enough,
that's awesome.
I walked in the Old Bailey one day and there's a tap on my shoulder. And it's, "Oh, mate." I turned around and there's an old mate from the SBS who actually lives abroad. He lives in Europe, but he'd come back just to help out for one day. So awesome. I had an American guy that I knew from a SWAT team in California that came and sat in the gallery one day, and just tremendous support. And I can't tell you just how important that was.
Yeah, I bet.
But this little protection team, a lot of coppers become black cab drivers in London. Yeah. And we had a little team of about 3 or 4 cab drivers that would pick me up. And of course, they were able to do the bus routes and all the rest of it, avoid surveillance, get me to court. And then I had a little protection team that would see me through the front door, but more importantly, would look after my family or friends and get them in and out of court without being associated with me. So that was all fantastic. So when this woman on the jury had a rash, like my missus was just like completely despondent. It's like, this never
dragging on and on.
This is never going to end. But the day that they finished early, the cab picked me up, and then we went to a junction, and my missus jumped in the car, and we went round the block to do a little bit of a counter surveillance move, and it was a lovely sunny day, and I looked to my right, and literally the other side of this room, sitting on a bench outside a pub, are about 4 members of my jury, and there's a guy who turned out to be the jury foreman, and another guy, and they're both talking to this guy who I've identified as the weak link in the jury, and he's sort of sitting there like this, and they're like, "You want a drink, mate?" He goes, "Oh yes, I'll have a shandy, please." So one bloke gone into the pub to get a shandy, and as soon as he's gone, the 2 blokes on either side of him just like fucking got in his ear and they're like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And I sort of immediately cheered up and I went, right, I know what's happening now. The jury have just gone, "Look, mate, we've got to have a unanimous verdict. The judge has told us he wants a unanimous verdict. You're the only fly in the ointment." And they were trying to
sort them out.
Yeah. Anyway, it never was the case. But what happened was the following day, we all come in and the jury go out. And there's still been a while, and then the judge comes and we all get called back into court. Now, every time the judge wants to speak to you, whether it be for the woman that's got the rash or whatever it might be, you're sitting in the canteen at the Old Bailey with your federation rep and your barrister and, your crew around you, and all of a sudden it's, all parties in the case of Long to court 10, please. And like your heart just, and your arsehole goes sixpence dustbin lid. And you go through, and I was deliberately taking longer than I needed to get up there to give my family time to get in, because the family of Zell Rodney was sitting in court and they were given priority, So anyway, I'd get in the witness box, and the judge came in and he said, "Right, everybody," he goes, "the jury have let us know that they're still unable to come to a verdict, but they have, I believe, come to a majority verdict. So I'm inclined to call them in, ask them if they've come to a unanimous verdict. If they haven't, I'll send them out for lunch, and then I'll call them back in. And if after lunch they still haven't come to a unanimous verdict, I'll accept a majority verdict." So they call the jury back in. They ask the foreman to stand up, and this guy stands up, and I'm thinking, oh, good, because I like the cut of this bloke. He seemed to be a bit of a gentleman. He always let the ladies into the jury box, before. And the judge said, have you, or the clerk of the court or whoever said, have you come to a verdict upon which you're all agreed? And he goes, yes, my lord. And like everybody looked at each other, all the members of the jury like looking at each other, and one of the members of the jury was like tugging his shirt sleeve and going, no, we haven't. Yeah. And the judge sort of looks over his glasses and goes, I think you mean no. And that was just like broke the stress. And as it broke the stress, all the women on the jury all looked at me and sort of either smiled or gave a little sort of, and I'm like, right, I'm not guilty. Yeah. Stone bonkers. I'm absolutely, as sure as I was that Azelle Rodney had a gun in his hand, I'm sure that I'm not guilty. And we all went back downstairs to the canteen again, and I had a sandwich for lunch and everything. And I'm drawing cartoons because I'm like the unit cartoonist. I'm sketching away there. And my barrister goes, oh, mate, he goes, you are the coolest cucumber I've ever come across. I said, how? He said, you can be drawing cartoons and things. I said, I'm innocent. He said, well, I know that, and we all know that. He says, but the jury doesn't. I said, yeah, they do. They know that. And sure enough, we went back in and it was a not guilty. And I'd promised myself I was going non-emotional. So I came back in the box and I looked up. My missus just had her head in her hands. My son, who's like, like in rusty tufty bootlegging, see him like on the verge of like bursting into tears. The female Serco guard that had sat through the whole trial with me, she's in tears. I'm like, for fuck's sake,
But that's some moment.
So, yeah.
A relief, but do you get compensated, mate, for the stress of that 10 years?
Of course not.
Nothing.
Well, you're not going to, because otherwise, if you compensated me, you'd have to compensate literally everyone that gets found not guilty.
But when you're doing it and it's your job,
you
know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not. You're not like it's not just something.
And the damage the press did too.
Oh, awful.
No.
10 years.
That's what it is. But I think certainly in the case of Whiskey 80, who's obviously very topical at the minute, I think he has got some form of claim. But I just cannot see that the reason mine took 10 years is for the reasons that I gave. The law, there was a gap in the law, they couldn't do it, blah, blah, blah. But in his case, it's just like, how can it possibly, if he's already been cleared by a court, how can it then take this long to get to a point to him? And they should, it's against natural justice. It's just, to me, it's cruel, and it's just, like you said, you said it, that's what he's trained to do. Yeah. You've trained him to do it, and when he does what you've trained him to do, your first instinct is to. So when I was working on the ambulance service, I used to have this conversation a lot with my paramedics, a young lass in her 20s, but very, very, got her head massively screwed on, and she said, I just don't get it. She said, because worst case scenario, you made a mistake and you shot the wrong person.
Yeah.
She goes, paramedics and technicians quite regularly make mistakes that result in life-changing injuries or death. Yeah. But the first instinct of the state isn't to prosecute them. Yeah. It's to make sure that the mistake doesn't get made again.
Make sure they're all right.
So it'll be reviewed, and they'll perhaps be if a surgeon leaves an instrument in somebody, which happens. Yeah. That the first thing isn't to do him for manslaughter. It might now be to do him something, but even if he gets convicted of what do you call it? Professional manslaughter. I forgot what they call it now. There's a term for it, isn't there? But even if he got found guilty, they're not going to put him in prison. They're going to
corporate manslaughter.
Yeah. So you've done what you've been trained to do, but because you used a gun and not a scalpel, he said, people get given the wrong drugs, they die. It's a tragedy. It should never happen, but we're all humans. But if you acted in good faith because you genuinely believed that your life or the life of the public or whatever were in imminent threat, in imminent danger, there needs to be some other recourse other than instinctively think the first thing we've got to do is prosecute this person. And that seems to be their go-to. That seems to be their catch-all, There was a thing that I was taught on day one in the Metropolitan Police, and I'll leave you with this. And it's like, basically, they said, if you can't take a joke, you shouldn't have joined. Oh, it wasn't a very funny joke, but I took it.
No, mate, it's a real insight, mate, into that I knew bits of it, but to be able to sit with you and listen to that, and it's shocking, mate.
What I want to know, is it more interesting than Andy's dits?
Well, you know.
Megan, mate, thanks so much for taking the time.
Pleasure.
It's been a real pleasure for us. Thanks, mate.